Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have a special guest today, my dear friend Gregg Hurwitz. You've written a number of books, comic books, and articles. Is that right?
That's right.
That pretty much sums it all up.
That's it. There's nothing more to know about.
All right. Well, we can get out of here then, I guess. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm on book tour, which I always like being on. I run through on the Texas run, obviously. Houston, Austin. I got Dallas tomorrow, and things are clicking along.
This is the 11th book.
11th Orphan X book. It's my 27th overall, but it's the 11th in the Orphan X series.
Okay. Let's start with you, a little background on you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Northern California.
Are you being cagey for a reason?
No, you mean
You don't want to say
do you
where?
want the city?
Yeah, I want the address.
Okay, I was born in San Francisco. I grew up in Saratoga. Went to high school in San Jose.
Where's Saratoga?
Saratoga's Silicon
Marin
Valley.
County?
It's by,
Oh, okay, so
it's
it's
right
south.
by Sunnyvale, Campbell, all that. I went
Is
to
that
high
considered
school.
South Bay?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I went to high school in San Jose. Went to a Jesuit high school, which was weird because I grew up in a very not religious household. But my parents sent me off because I think there was kind of a lot of smart assery around the public schools, and they sent me off to this Jesuit high school where I didn't know anybody, and that's where I went for high school. And then off I went to college.
To college where?
Went to Harvard, studied English, American Lit, and psychology. My thesis advisor was Jordan Peterson. That's where we met. On the psych side, it was under Marjorie Garb. I'm sorry, on the English side. And then I started my first novel when I was an undergrad. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do. So I was 19, started writing this book, wrote a pretty shitty rough draft the summer before and after my senior year. And then I went off to England. I got a master's in Shakespearean tragedy, but I was really furiously rewriting this book. And the Shakespearean tragedy seems kind of amusing. People will be like, well, why would a Shakespeare scholar write thrillers? First of all, I'm not a scholar. I'm more like a Shakespeare dilettante because it was a one-year master's. But, Shakespeare, everything he wrote, especially the tragedies, are highly structured, narrative-driven tales of lust, intrigue, and murder. It sort of was a perfect overlap. Thrillers are very structured. They're obviously action-geared.
Yeah.
And so it was great. And I was rewriting. And then I got pretty lucky. I sold my first book kind of right out of grad school and never had to have a real job.
Shakespeare invented over 1,700 words.
That's correct.
Including eyeball, which is odd that didn't exist before.
Wild. Upstairs.
Swagger.
Sunrise. I mean, it goes on and on and on. You can't even believe it.
The mind is it's a very curious thing with him because he was writing intentionally in the common language to draw attention to, let's call it, an imbalance in power or abused power a lot of the time, and was writing in the common language but had to invent words that didn't exist before to explain to people what was going on. But it had the added benefit of making the writing better as well.
Yeah, I mean, so that's called alchemization, right? Where you use a word in one context, you combine it, you use a noun for a verb. I like that. That's heavy in the noir tradition.
A verbed, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, one of the things that's really cool back then, the Globe Theater, which is where everything was performed that he wrote, if you slice that in half, it's a perfect cross-section of Elizabethan society. And so we talk about four-quadrant entertainment now, right? That's a Pixar movie, that's Marvel movies. He was writing four-quadrant entertainment, and you can see in the works where he'll make sort of a glancing reference to Ovid's Metamorphosis for the royalty up here, and then he'll make a dick joke for the groundlings. And so the way he uses pacing and humor and profanity, he's constantly juggling all these things to keep everybody entertained. And the theater scene was quite rowdy at the time. And so he's holding the whole society there. And so he really he's a commercial writer. He's trying to put asses in chairs to sell out the Globe Theater. He didn't even record his stuff for posterity.
Right.
Well,
Do you think it elevated the lower crowd or brought the upper crowd down?
I think because he's a singular genius, he brought everybody up. I mean, that's such a gift, and that's all. It's funny because people talk about with writing, oh, well, what's literary, right? And what's commercial fiction? And you're like, what's Dickens? What's Faulkner, right? That's the goal. The goal isn't to say, when you have an artist who's truly great. They can fulfill all the categories of everything. They sort of transcend the definition between commercial and literary. You think about this a lot, like with Hitchcock for film as a director. Is Hitchcock creative, or was he a critical success, or is he a commercial success? It's like, how about both? How about you shoot for both all the time?
Yeah.
So
I think there's a certain level of success that some people might get in Hollywood where they become so independently minded, trying to stand out, that they're no longer readable or watchable.
Yes.
It's just like, I think one of the I'm going to paraphrase this as Einstein quote about, if you can't explain your idea to a child, you don't really understand it yourself, right? And I think there's something in writing about that as well, like or not just writing for fiction, nonfiction, but also writing for marketing and advertising, or writing for film and television. I think it's all the same. If you're so stuck somewhere that it becomes elusive for other people, you haven't done enough work yet. That's
right,
what I
or
think.
it becomes masturbatory, and then it's about you and your perception and your brilliance, rather than getting something that connects. But you see that everywhere, right? That's groupthink. You see it in political administrations. You see it in political parties, where if you surround yourself with enough yes men, then you go off and you make your own movie that's your own version of brilliance, but you're not taking notes. Like, you get powerful enough to remove yourself from the free marketplace of ideas, where things can get really honed. And so it's a trick, as one gains power in anything, in creativity and politics, to stay open to the right kind of critics, right? So that you're taking things in while you're maintaining your vision. And there's a trick, and the trick involves humility, because you get to a point, I think, where a lot of the notes, like a lot of the times I get notes from a studio, let's say, if I'm working on the screenplay side, the notes aren't necessarily right. So it's easy to dismiss or argue away from listening to people. But part of the job when you're getting creative notes is to identify the underlying editorial anxiety.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'll get a script maybe where the studio head says, like, this is really slowed down a lot on page 90. And I'll look at it, the turn of the third act, and go, this is fine. But if I slow down, I can think, oh, it gets boggy around page 80, but he only noticed it to write the note on page 90. So the more you can be open and non-defensive, yet maintaining your own judgment, and that's very hard as we accrue power or influence.
I think in the macro level, you've got to know where the nodes in public life are that are predictive of downstream culture too. That's a superpower that some people have, and other people, it takes them, as you mentioned, there's a time delay. And you see it in politics a lot. You see these people who are ahead of trends, and then you see people who are we call them early adopters, and you see people who come later. And the people who come later typically aren't very good at doing stuff. They're just I think they're just gap fillers for the most part.
They don't know how to make their own weather, and that's one of the keys. It's funny because one of the things I've noticed a lot in, let's say we've had a resurgence of power of conservatism, obviously, since Trump has been elevated. And one of the big criticisms is that he's hiring people, or he's bringing people into the administration who have widespread popular appeal, right? You take someone like Mehmet Oz and you're putting him in charge of $1.75 trillion with healthcare. But I think there's a very strong argument to be made, especially if distrust has been eroded by elite institutions, that you have to have people in charge who can talk to people, especially when we're having and trying to deal with the rise of populism. And so, like, what can be a criticism that's inherent in something, I think often can hide a kind of envy that other people don't necessarily connect in the same ways. And that's a benefit.
Yeah.
Like, politicians should be able to speak to and encapsulate their ideas and reach everybody. That should be something, if you want to do better than somebody who you're criticizing because they're commercial and have commercial reach, whether it's in film or in theater or in politics, your job is to also figure that out. Because if you don't know how to message what you're talking about politically, that's actually that's a moral failing. You don't get to just have all your policies that are super smart in your subcommittees and have no idea how to convey them to people.
Yeah.
Because the act of conveying it is the act of, one of the lines that I've learned, I've used a lot in my interventions culturally is, reality is where ideology goes to die. And so if you have an idea and you're going to convey it and you're running into all sorts of problems and arguments and getting blown up, the act of learning how to convey something and make it digestible to your fellow humans is an act of honing that idea into something that's more effective and is a better tool or a better work of art or a more sustainable policy or platform. And we tend to forget that if you're dismissive of something actually having to compete in the free marketplace of ideas.
Yeah, I think people who are not confident, that's fine. Most people need to be led. That's how it works, right? I mean, this is a math problem. The span of control is 3 to 5, typically, right? The amount of people that a single person can manage is 3 to 5. At an upper level, let's say you have a flatter organization, and we call it 7. That means you have 7 direct reports, and then those direct reports have 7 and 7 and 7, and it goes on like that, and there's a diminished amount of power as you go down that flow chart. Most people don't have upper level management capabilities. That's just a reality of life. It can't be so, because if it was, we wouldn't have these rules that we go by. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So the fact is that most people need to be led in some way. Mm-hmm. And then there's implications for that. If you have leadership capability and you refuse to do it, then you're doing harm to society, in my opinion, right? And if you're a poor leader, if you're somebody who has power and wields it for your own sake or wields it poorly or whatever, then you're also doing quite a bit of damage. And there are these vacuums everybody knows that nature abhors and fills them quickly. There are these vacuums where the people who lack the confidence or capability to be a leader are waiting for somebody to kind of not necessarily tell them, but at least show them what to do or give them options, right? And we do a pretty poor job of that because we have too many people who don't have that capability that you're talking about rising to positions of power for some other reason than that, because our selection process and our incentive structure is incorrect at the moment, and maybe it has been for a long time. So we're selecting the wrong type of people, and it's a finite resource.
Right, and it's also, it's got to be taught. And one of the parts of leading is, if you're culture building, which obviously you know a lot about because this is life or death in the military, part of your job is to also identify and maximize people for what it is that they're capable of. Some of them are going to be future leaders, not all of them, as you point out, but some people need to be maximized in a role. Yeah. So it's this really weird job of honing people to empower them, not by yielding to their idiosyncratic definitions of themselves, but by setting a consistent, high and fair standard to make sure that everybody around you is reaching their potential. And then that's what gets an organization to hum, or business or group. And that also lays the seeds for what can be iterable, right? When we're gone, who the next leaders are going to be. It's very difficult if you start to flip that structure around and you stop tacking towards merit and really high standards and embodying them. And grievance does that. Grievance unstitches the future. If you make complaints and excuses for why people are more successful than you, then the future comes undone. There was just a report about how decimated UCLA Medical School is right now based on their standards. They decided to gear everything around sort of social justice and acceptance and teaching and lowering basic standards. They found 50% of the graduates right now of UCLA Medical Center can't perform of graduate school basic tasks of doctoring. So it's really interesting. I've had a lot of conversations with theologians. I've had increasingly more and more of them figuring out how to unstick things. And one of the things that's interesting, this is sort of like what the story of Cain is, right? Cain is the spirit of resentment and grievance. Abel's, making better sacrifices. Cain's making kind of shitty sacrifices. It says resentment crouched like a great cat at his door. So he goes and kills his brother, but he's cursed generationally for 7 generations. Because if you destroy the thing that you're supposed to aspire towards, then you lose your North Star. You lose, what's the word you talked about? The word that we talked about in your book of the when you're
azimuth.
Yes.
Yeah.
If that's gone, you're screwed. You're rudderless, and then you can't just rebuild it. So if you've gutted out an institution, let's say UCLA Medical Center, with a bunch of stuff that's sort of covered over grievance, right, that you're claiming is doing some other social good, you can't reconstitute that now generationally. Right. The teachers are gone, the staff's gone, the standards have slid, and so it's a generational problem that you urge into existence by failure to lead properly.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's, there's the issue that you can't learn how to lead. I mean, this is part of what you're saying. You can't know how to lead until you've learned how to follow somebody else. And if there's no one to follow, then you're kind of fucked. I mean, we're starting from scratch again, because following somebody else and seeing what they do well and what they do poorly, that's the experience that gives you the capability to do that thing you're talking about, where you tailor the message to the group. The next group or a different group. They teach it to some degree in technical writing, right? You should write to your audience specifically, because you shouldn't make assumptions about what they know and what they don't know, all this stuff. And there's something about that. Again, I like, in the military, we have the order, the defined task, and then we have what's called the implied task as well. So if I tell you to go do something, but you also know what our conditions and standards are, there are implied tasks within that. You have to do it this way to this standard, etc. There's something about that implies there are stages of life, and maybe it isn't just about age. Maybe you go through cycles repeatedly throughout your life. And so how do we know what stage we're at what point? And I think for young men, we've erased that in a lot of ways by completely removing any sort of
judgment.
The judgment, but what's the apex of the judgment is an older man or a group of older men conferring authority and status onto this younger man, and that happens in rites of passage, right? And we just don't have that. The Jews have it with the bar mitzvah, but nobody else in male society really does, unless you go to the military or something like that. And I would say the case with these schools as well. If you remove the potential for failure, then nobody will ever get good. That's just how it is.
There's no question. And if you also elevate, like, students are students because when you're a student, you don't know anything yet. You're there to learn. And if you haven't had coaches who are hard on you, teachers who are hard on you, professors who are setting standards, it's impossible to advance without failing, without sternness, without judgment applied to you. And we've had this really weird rush of putting empathy up on top of the dominance hierarchy for all things, and it doesn't work there. It's a perfectly fine value to have as 17th in your value structure. You want empathy somewhere in there. You don't need it at the top, because the problem is then you're having undisciplined children, undisciplined minds are setting the tempo rather than being told where to go and how to aim, and earning their authority a bit at a time until they're taking leadership tasks on themselves.
Yeah.
And so it's deteriorating a lot, where we have, it's amazing if you even look at in activism now, like what passes for activism in a lot of instances is just a prolonged temper tantrum. There's no discipline to it.
Yeah.
And people forget the civil rights movement. There was intense discipline that was part of that. Before John Lewis crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, these were black men, powerful black men, and they would meditate on imagining the cops who were going to beat them as little boys so that they wouldn't reciprocate in kind. Because if you're going to go up against the law to try and change a law, the example that you set has to be that the corruption of that law shattering across your unbowed shoulders draws enough of your fellow citizens into line behind your position to want to alter the law. It's not that you can just scream and be undisciplined and everyone's supposed to forgive you for it and then you get school credit for protesting. So, again and again, we've seen this abdication of responsibility in everything. In terms of what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to protest, what we're allowed to. It's almost like a removal of accountability for consequences of action. And you're screwed with that.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to aim.
It's turned into LARPing now.
Yes.
And it's so it's essentially like a lifestyle platitude is what I call it, because you have to imagine the scenario. You go do you stand in the street or whatever dumb idea you have of protest now, yelling at police who are doing stuff. You've made noise, you feel righteous, and satisfied, but the people who need help are still sitting there unhelped. And this is an incentive structure issue to me, because the person has felt the need to help other people, which is a good thing to do. They have gone out and done what they've seen others do, or what they've been cajoled to do by whatever means. They have received the chemical reward for that, or the social status reward for that. But the person who needs help is still unhelped.
Yep.
And you've now, if the entire race was about getting to the finish line, you've removed the finish line off to the side, and just you're running in circles for the rest of your life. And I think that's why these revolutionaries never stop, because there is no end state.
It's
right?
It's vampiric. It's funny we're talking. I mean, this is a major theme in Antihero. That's the Orphan X book I'm on tour for right now. It's the first one where Evan Smoke, my main character, he's a former government assassin. He helps people who are in need. And this time he winds up with a woman who's a devout Orthodox Christian who makes him swear that he won't kill anybody on her behalf. He's going to sort of avenge her the way that he does, because she's been brutalized by this group of young men. But his realization he has is, if let's say that he takes on his anger and uses that to do and to act beyond what the victim herself actually wants, and she refuses to see herself as a victim, then he's sort of stealing her suffering for himself. And that's vampiric.
Yeah.
So, like, beware of allies. Beware of people who are merely making noise and marching and protesting.
People who
and
co-opt causes.
Yeah, and not fixing them in the real world simultaneously. Plenty of people have a right to protest peacefully. It's an important part of this. It's an important part of the combat that we do in America in the free marketplace of ideas. There's a reason the First Amendment is first and then the Second Amendment second. We want to fight and argue with words. But, there's a lot of people out for a cause, and you go, what are you actually doing to fix the cause? How long has this interested you before the algorithms wrap their tentacles around your lizard brain, number one? Is this an ongoing concern? And are there any steps that you're doing to actually fix the problem beyond posting about it on social media and elevating your own social status through luxury beliefs? So that to me is always the test. How long have you given a shit about this?
Yeah. Do you remember that movie PCU with Jeremy Piven and David Spade?
No, I didn't see it.
You should watch it, because it was prescient for sure.
Okay.
I won't get into it now, but so with all that in mind, why do you think that the left as an apparatus so often elevates student activists, people who we know don't necessarily know anything? They know some small degree. I guess they have energy, so that's good. They're all concentrated in one spot, so it's easy for them to get together and do stuff. They have some free time to do it. But why the focus on student activism like that?
So,
I mean, because in broader society, if we had any other problem, if like when COVID happened, we didn't say, I wonder what 19-year-old undergraduates think about this.
Can you imagine? Think how dumb we were at 19. Like, no, we don't have myelinated prefrontal cortexes.
Men don't until 25 to 30, depending on the man, right?
It's amazing any of us survive. It's staggering.
I was an idiot until I was 28.
Yeah, I mean, there's parts of me that I'm still trying to shake the idiot off. I mean, there's shit you learn at every major stage. I mean, there's stuff at 40 that you can't believe. I mean, so look, there's two answers for that. One of them is that you think of liberalism, and here, you and I have talked a lot about true liberalism and true conservatism. So in the true sense of it, liberalism is a change agent in a lot of way. There's big five personality traits. Like, a lot of people are familiar with the Myers-Briggs test. It's probably among your listeners. It ranks your big five personality traits. That's the basis of Myers-Briggs. So think of Myers-Briggs as the Cliff Notes for big five. And there's a trait that's called trait openness. How open are you to new ideas and new people? The prediction of that predicts for political proclivity more than anything else aside from what family you're born into. So high trait openness is going to lean you liberal. And it makes sense. Are you open to new experiences? Do you like living in cities? It's different people. It's different accents. It's different foods. Creative, that's why there's these spots of blue in red states, right? Because everyone's in, and you want the mix and you want all that diversity. Conservatism is lower in trait openness. Okay, so they like things that are more enclosed. They like to live around people who are more like them. This doesn't mean just white people. This is black, green, brown, everything, right? People like to live in a community of like-minded people.
It's more like social and cultural influence than it is anything about immutable characteristics. It's typically opted-in behavior that defines closed trait.
Right.
Openness.
Some people don't want to go eat at a different ethnic restaurant every night. They like their schedule. They like their routine. And so you think about that as being higher traits that are close. So you like borders around things if you're conservative. And so you want to border around, like build a wall is a great slogan, right? A nation needs a border around it. They like genders to have borders around them and not be fluid. They have a border where their skin starts and a vaccination begins, right? So it's a deep psychological trait. And so the job of the two, of conservatives and liberals, are to act in tandem, where liberals are sort of the gas and conservatism is the brake. And to navigate complex change, you need both of them. Because if it's just liberalism, they stomp on a brake and go off a cliff. And they stomp on the gas and go off a cliff. And so the job of conservatives is to have in-group favoritism, to kind of be like, hang on a minute, we can't have unmitigated immigration if we can't digest it, so that we understand we have a shared value set as we digest it. And the job of liberals is to say, look, if you make a wall that is impenetrable and doesn't have mechanisms for different kinds of people to come in, then we will stagnate and die. The center is going to get brittle, and we can't feed and nourish it with new ideas and people. And so the two of them have to work in tandem. But so for higher trait openness, what you're going to find there is also higher traits like empathy, right? Higher traits like the inclusion, like the things that have been brought in. And so liberalism tends to want to listen to groups who are traditionally less empowered. They listen to revolutionary voices. Young people tend to be higher in trait openness and want to incorporate new ideas more rapidly before their kind of brains grow in and they settle into an understanding of what it takes to have a center that holds. So that's part of it. And the other part of it is that I firmly believe is that we've lived in an idyll that we're about to emerge from. It sort of feels like we're at the end of the Enlightenment in some ways. And since World War II, we have lived in a period of unbelievable peace in America, where we have not had we haven't had anything since World War II that is a nationwide, top to bottom period of suffering and sacrifice and responsibility. And while we're in that period, we have forgotten a lot of our contact about the real world and the horrors of the real world, and that there's people out there who hate us and want to kill us, and that there's forces of evil. We've gotten very inured to this. And so one of the things that happens is we haven't updated our frames of mind, meaning we have these shining moments where we think, oh, well, every activist is Martin Luther King or Harvey Milk, right? It's not necessarily a 17-year-old kid who's spoiled beyond belief and is a narcissistic, hedonistic individual, right? We think that everything is either Vietnam or it's Chamberlain getting off the plane waving the piece of paper. Well, conflicts are different now. And so when we reach to things, when we reach to our points of traction, and I think with liberalism, one of the ways it's gotten off track and fails to be liberalism and moves way more to progressivism or leftism or revolutionarism, is that all change is good. It's just sort of like you click on the thing to say, oh, well, more empathy has been good because of the civil rights movement and because of the things we've done wrong in the past, right? And because of this movement towards greater rights for different groups. And they just sort of turn the dial on and snapped it off, and everything is set that any change, anything that moves future, that is more empathetic, that is more involving, that is more open, is a universal good that puts you on the right side of history. And of course, you can't have any value like that move forward completely unmitigated. And so I think that the framework, the liberal framework, conservative framework too, has its own problems of what it's tacking back to, is broken on the wrong reference points. And it's broken on having certain values that it's elevated above all others. Like if you elevate inclusion and equity and empathy above all other values, nothing can function.
Yeah. So I guess by the way, every part of life has binaries like that. The high and low trait openness, like literally every part of life, from the micro to macro part of your own life. That is to say, the difference between men and women on par, not always, but on par. then the social expressions later on, like mom and dad, function differently. But even in business, the balance between the marketing department that wants to spend money and the finance department that doesn't want to spend money. I mean, it's literally every facet of life that this stuff occurs in. And I think the thing I wrote about you're not politically homeless and defining what liberal and conservative really mean is it, even doing the research for it, understanding where the words came from, how they've changed over time, was pretty enlightening to me, because it's not always obvious if you just, like you say, if you fuck the priority up, if you fuck it up, then you're not able to filter through reality anymore.
Well, and there's a weird assumption too in progressivism that empathy is a uniform good, and all we need to do is just educate people into it. There's an incredible condescension. So conservatives is a different big five trait, is called conscientiousness. And so it's why I love working with people who are from the military, right? That's a baseline high level conscientiousness. And conscientiousness is like, do you return phone calls on time? Do you show up? Do you do what you're going to say you do? Conservatives are way higher in that trait, and liberals are way lower in that trait. Here's some things that high trait conscientiousness codes for: longer life, more health, more stable finances, and better marriages. And so whenever I'm talking to liberals or progressives who are saying, like, we just need to educate conservatives into other stuff, it's like, they're doing fine with their stable marriages and longer lifespans. There's something in that works very well. And when you talk about all things being binary, that's exactly right, because you think about this too in a business sense. You're talking about marketing, but it's also very much between the visionary and then the CEO. So you get Steve Jobs, who's a visionary, right? He has these brilliant ideas. He gets fired. The CEOs take over. They run the company on time, on rails, but then it doesn't go anywhere. And then they need to bring Steve Jobs back in to reinvigorate it with more visionary thought. It's also the two hemispheres of the brain. It's right hemisphere and left hemisphere. And so these traits are in all parts of the culture, that both of them are needed in order to function. And we can't have, it's like we have this idiotic dialogue, it seems like, where you talk to people on the left and they're convinced that 100% of the problems in America have originated from the right, and vice versa. And it's like, guys, it's like in a marriage. If you find anybody in a marriage that's dysfunctional at 25 years and their answer is every fucking thing is their wife's fault or every single thing is the husband's fault, you're not paying attention to the way that we need to function.
Yeah.
Everything's mirroring each other.
So I guess the question is, and we'll start with the left, because they're the ones that have gotten the most wild lately, I think. Although conservatives have abandoned conservatism for the most part. I think you mentioned Trump earlier. I think it's really interesting that he's not conservative in the traditional sense, and he's certainly not a libertarian, but he's done more conservative shit than any so-called conservative president in my lifetime. Certainly. It's not even close. And then he's done more than any libertarian ever. To just yesterday deregulating, getting rid of this stupid, like we're all going to die from carbon nonsense. You know what I mean? But I guess the question is, how does the left and how do people in general update their preference filters so that, one, they can understand? I don't know that you should reorder priorities necessarily. I think you should still go through the same checklist, and it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Are we safe and secure? Is everybody fed? Okay, cool. Let's see if we can help some other people. That should be the list. So I guess the question again is, I don't know that there's a way to recognize that things are changing too much, that the old system isn't working anymore until it's too late. I think that's probably true. So it has to be persistent. It has to be a persistent, like, discipline checklist. And as the relationship between conservative and liberal becomes fractured, they tend to start close and they're whispering to each other, and then they're talking, and then they're shouting, and then the only thing that you can reach each other with are bullets and bombs. You know what I mean? The farther they get apart, the more likely it is they get not just entrenched in their positions, but more radical in their positions.
Yes.
As a defense mechanism or whatever the fuck. That is the thing that I would like to avoid, is just have discipline.
Me too.
I want discipline in politics. That's what I want. Discipline enough that conservatives are like checking. They're looking around to make sure we're not missing anything, and liberals are looking around to make sure that we're getting everything, that we have the security and safety before they, try to do this wild bullshit. And I don't know if that's possible. That might be just as utopian as the dumbassery of socialism or whatever, right? But that it seems like that should be an achievable thing, and it only a very strong relationship with civics and human nature at the same time, right? And I think probably James Madison doesn't get nearly enough credit, in my opinion. He was a Federalist. He wanted the Constitution. But he listened to, and by the way, Adams and Hamilton would not have. They wouldn't have cared. They would have said, "Fuck you, we're doing it." But he listened to the anti-Federalists, Jefferson and his cohort, and said, "Look, I understand we don't want a king either. So here's what we'll do. In the first session of Congress, where I'll be Speaker of the House, we'll get the Bill of Rights passed." And he did it, right? That was the compromise. George Mason said he would cut his hand off before he would sign the Constitution. But even he voted for it on both ends. So it's like we've shown that it's possible. I have these conversations all the time, and for some reason people seem to have this idea that the founders all got along and we're all kind of on the same page. And like we had a 10-year period of the Articles of Confederation where we weren't even a real country. After we won our independence, like functionally, we were not a real country. New York almost got taken from us because we couldn't marshal resources in an army to defend it. And then finally, they came and had some really hard conversations. And Washington, another one. I think Washington probably gets his due. He's number one. But one of the things he doesn't get credit for is how meticulous he was about managing his public persona, not for his own sake, because he knew who he was and he knew how much that meant to everybody. So when he showed up to the to the Constitutional Convention, he didn't speak because he knew if he spoke, then that would be the law. So he didn't say anything until the very end, where he said we should probably adjust the congressional districts down a little bit so there's more representation. That's the only thing he said at the entire meeting. He just sat there looking old with fucked up teeth. I think those two guys, although I would probably be more on the anti-federalist side, those are the two people from the revolutionary period that I respect the most, or from the constitutional period that I respect the most, because they had hard opinions on these things, but they were still capable of putting those aside and realizing that this is the system that I want, but it still needs safeguards. And if it doesn't have them, the system, no matter how good I think it is, will crumble as soon as I'm dead. That's what I look for. But how do you filter for that when you're voting for a politician these days? Because it's all just kabuki theater, It's
so much kabuki theater. I mean, the first thing you were talking about, I think about that all the time. I mean, a true liberal and a true conservative are handshake distance across the aisle from each other.
Yeah.
You can specify everything you don't agree with.
It's like two engineers looking at a problem and be like, hey, wait a minute, you got to go 10 more degrees this way, otherwise this is going to happen. Oh, shit, you're fucking right. Let's change that.
There's a reason why. That big five personality traits that I talked about, those are evenly distributed. And it's not between race, between this or that. It's distributed across all people. There's a reason for that. Whether your belief is that that's evolutionary selection or that that's God-given. Either way, we are meant to have this combination of traits in order to govern ourselves. That's been proven beyond any doubt. We need all of these things. One of my concerns is that sometimes when things get bad enough, the only thing that can wake people up to wisdom is a great deal of suffering. And I think a lot of what the things are you're trying to do with your emphasis on solutions and trying to get out ahead of things is to try to reduce how much suffering needs to happen before we can right the ship. I mean, as I see it, there's three really major threats right now that are pushing us further and further apart. One of them is psychopathic algorithms, right? Algorithms are going to pick up. on the news, on social media, we know what sells and what drives things. And it's always going to be the most extreme statements by the most extreme people that is selected out to target us based on a deep machine learning reading of what's going to piss us off the most. And so we have that in play. We have hostile foreign regimes that are feeding this. I think it boggles the American imagination to even comprehend what it means to have state-controlled troll farms in China, in Russia, North Korea, the Islamic Republic. That's a little bit less so with the giant troll farms, but where you have thousands of people with tens of thousands of devices that are just plowing into stuff. And when hostile foreign regimes are coming after American opinions, by the way, they don't give a shit if it's left or right. So they, the KGB in the 70s was funding, empowering both the KKK and the Black Panthers. The aim isn't vaccines pro or against. The aim is they don't give a shit about Jew hate. It's just the next thing. Can you get people arguing about anti-Semitism? Can you get people arguing about trans rights? Because Putin and Xi don't have the problems of free speech, and they don't have the problems of people making up their own minds. So the more we're fighting among each other, spurred on by hostile foreign regimes and psychopathic algorithms, the less we can focus on getting our act together and looking at the actual chessboard of where America needs to be and compete on the world stage. I'd say the third element is, bad faith domestic players. And some of them have foreign capture and some of them are just agents of chaos. And the aim of those three things really, whether overtly or just based on the mechanisms that are set up by profit and fucked up incentive structures, is to push people, especially younger people, off the fringes, whether far right or far left, into this horseshoe of nihilism. Because people forget the Nazi Party were the nationalist socialists. It's a combination of the two when they meet. And if they can push, if a hostile foreign regime can push somebody all the way around to nihilism, they don't give a shit if the next bus they get on is violent Antifa or if it's like a Groyper neo-Nazi group. All they care about is getting somebody to the place where they've decided that everything is nihilistic, there's no point, violence is the only answer, and that chaos should reign. And it doesn't matter what flavor it winds up being.
Yeah. No, the only way that can end is with exclusionary nationalism, right? Because you can't have a closed system where the government is a big part of a welfare state, right? That isn't let's call it monochromatic, right? It just doesn't work. You see some of these, and people use these in these fucking stupid ass research studies about socialism inside of a capitalist society from Northern Europe, and it worked for a long time because they were homogenous. And once the introduction,
and with huge oil reserves and billions of dollars, like it's not applicable.
No, once the introduction of Muslims happened into every single one of those countries, it fell apart immediately. You know what I mean? It's because it has nothing to do with being Muslim per se. It was that they came from a place where the government was largely responsible for the outcomes in their life, and they don't share the culture, right? So the reason that it can work is that everybody opts into it, just like every other ideology. There's no such thing as a forced ideology that's going to work. It just doesn't work. It can work if you have two elements, a homogenous society and tyranny. But without those two things, it doesn't work.
That's right. And we forget the unbelievable richness of the Greco-Roman tradition. I mean, so you start with Socrates, right? What's the Socratic technique? You're asking questions. It's non-coercive. You're not teaching somebody by telling them what to think. You're empowering them in their own mind within that. You get to Judaism, that's a freely entered into covenant. Christianity is a freely entered into covenant. Then that moves into English common law, which says that we all have, obviously there's several steps that you've, elucidated well in a lot of the pieces you're working on right now. But we have all these freedoms that we think just evolved out of nowhere. But the key for a lot of these traditions in the West is non-coercion. They are freedom-based. It doesn't matter. You can't force somebody to become a Christian.
Right.
You can't force somebody to become a Jew. You can't force somebody into learning the way that you want if you're using a Socratic technique or what happens at the academy. It has to be freely chosen consent. And that's absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned nationalism, and this is something that, this is This is really complicated for what's happening right now, because I think part of what's happening right now is that we are seeing our post-World War II consensus is falling apart now. And it's not a coincidence that a lot of members of the greatest generation are dying right now. The last of the Holocaust survivors are dying, right? We're at the end of a human lifespan of people who saw these horrors and understood them. And we forget, after World War II in America, there was a time that every CEO of every major American corporation was a veteran from World War II. And they understood implicitly that their job, they had incredible gratitude to have stability and sanity, at home. They had seen the horrors of the world. They didn't brag about their suffering. They were quiet about it. And there was an implicit understanding that they also had to do right by their workers and by the nation. It was just built into that understanding. When you talk about nationalism, what was the term that you used?
Exclusionary nationalism.
Exclusionary nationalism. Part of what happens is there's a huge knee-jerk reaction throughout the mainstream in America since World War II, because that is associated with Hitler. And one of the things that is a problem in our post-World War II narrative is that the myth that we have, there's like a burr around it. There's a lie that happened in our post-World War II story mythology that we've never rectified. And what that is that we partnered with an enormous psychopath, maybe even bigger, certainly bigger by death count, in Stalin, in order to defeat Hitler. And so what's happened is all of the weight of our post-World War II mythology has landed on nationalism. And Hitler, obviously, look, I'm a fucking Hurwitz, right? I'm not a fan of Hitler, but it doesn't mean that every single thing associated with him, including any notion of nationalism, can be tied to an anchor with him and sunk to the depths of hell. And so for decades and decades and decades, it is unthinkable for us to have a university that would have a professor who's a casual Nazi, right? Or who's like an extremist neo-Nazi student group on campus. But we have Marxist professors. We have socialist groups. And if you go and look at the death count between Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao Zedong, it's shocking. And we have not had as rigid a mainstream reaction to the extremism of the left since World War II. And so because there's been a very black and white binary, and we've refused to acknowledge the excesses of the far left, there's been a sort of blinking green light to that. And at the same time, we have vilified all notions of nationalism. And anything that is definitional, we talk a lot, you and I in particular, about nihilism in young men, particularly how to give them meaning. Well, if you can't define yourself by your religion, if you can't define yourself by your nation, how are we going to organize to actually hold together? And so there has to be an updating. We were talking about the negative points of reference that aren't updated, that every activist is John Lewis. Also, everyone who has a nationalist identity that's going to hold that foundation that we can build upon and also nourish it with rights and shared meaning and a shared value set. All of that is not Hitlerian, and we've not updated that.
Yeah, I think that creedal nationalism is the best possible form of government.
Yes.
Because not only does it put your it's an interesting thing. So not only does it prioritize opted-in ideology, this is our culture, this is what we believe, but it also allows us to kind of sort our allies based on how close to our creedal system they are. You know what I mean? Instead of having to do it based on some other reason, which I think is good. And when you're raised in that environment, which I would say people raised by the greatest generation certainly were, because it was the people who came back from World War II probably didn't have the same negative opinion of France and England that we do now, because they fought alongside these people a lot. I mean, Canada had Juno Beach right next to Omaha Beach. So it was like allies, axis. There were clear lines of delineation between who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. And it was based not on which side of the war you were on necessarily. It was based on what values you held, which is why there was an immediate break from Russia after World War II, while we still maintained relationships with Europe and Canada, obviously, even though they had more, not Canada so much, but Europe for sure had more socialist tendencies than we were comfortable with. But still, we stayed aligned with them closely for a very long time.
So France had a very different revolution than ours.
They did, yeah, yeah. They had a bourgeoisie revolution, right? Which is why, in my opinion, I think, not to get off on a fucking tangent here, but there's this sense that Washington did not want to get involved in that because he was beholden to England. But I think the reality is he saw what it was. He saw that it wasn't the kind of revolution that happened in America. It was just one aristocracy trying to take over another one, and we don't do that, you know. But yeah, I think creedal nationalism is really important.
Well, and it's also okay. I mean, this is another thing that we've lost. Like, I grew up a very, very liberal, properly liberal household. Tons of different cultures that I met through humor and food and family, all the ways you're supposed to. Non-coercive. Again, we're going to go back to that. But it's okay to have some cultures around the world that we don't understand and that we need to figure out more about before we are integrating with them. And the notion that any sort of, you know, shared or allied value set is inherently racist or jingoistic is insane. You know, one of the great things about America is we have a process by which people can quickly become American. You know, people can move here. Like, you and I could move to France tomorrow, and 30 years from now, we'd never be French. It's just not an option. And America has a process by which anybody, no matter where they came from, if they adhere properly, and this is, again, something you and I have spent a lot of time discussing, what's the mechanism by which that needs to happen that is safe and that is also proper so that we can maintain the rights and the freedom that we enjoy as Americans. Anybody can go through that. And in a lot of ways, we have in America, you know, I know that this is skewing in some ways more recently in more problematic directions. We have I think the best immigrant communities in the world here because of what the promise is here. I mean, part of this is geography. Yeah. But it makes sense that we need to make sure that whoever's coming in, that we are digesting those cultures, that there's tests and strictures to make sure that foundational rights are preserved. Yeah. And it's not like the rights that are preserved are only left or right, meaning, you know, protection of minorities, protection of freedom of religion, that goes every way. Like, when we talk about minority rights now, we tend to hear that as something from the left, but it also means if you're a Christian at a predominantly secular college where people are shutting you down or blocking out your right of free worship or your right of free speech, that it's there for you. It's so that we can continue to have the mechanisms by which the country functions. Another big one is rights for women. Cultures that have significant value and equivalent rights for women, that's very, very important. And if people are from other countries that don't necessarily adhere to that, but go through a process by which we understand that they're digested into an American point of view, it maintains that safety as well for women, for minority groups, for everything that we value. And we can't just forego that and call any criticism of that racist or jingoistic.
Yeah, I mean, it's equal protection under the law is like, I think it is. I don't think it's something that took us about 1,800 years to get it right, which is a long time, right? I mean, the Greeks first articulated the concept of natural law. I think it was Seneca actually that really nailed it down. And then 1,300 years after that is the Magna Carta, the first time that a king agrees, even reluctantly, and he went back on it and had to revisit. But 1,300 years before a king would agree that he was subject to the law as well. 1,300, and then another 470 years until 470 plus, I guess, until the United States Constitution was written. So you're talking about
it's a miracle,
17, almost 1,800 years it took. Let's just call it 2,000 for round number's sake, because Aristotle, Plato, Seneca, etc., all these span some time. It took that long for the idea to become a thing in practice. And I wonder why it isn't more obvious to people that the postmodernists are just modern sophists. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, it's so obvious. We built a great deal of Western civilization. I mean, I don't think people understand how much of Western civilization is built on Aristotle's reaction to sophistry and then Socrates' logic process.
Yes.
But postmodernism took hold relatively quickly at a time when people were quite a bit more educated on history and civics than people are today, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes education's a problem because you can get educated right out of common sense.
Yeah, Amathea.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
certainly.
And Carl Jung said, that Nazism could only have happened in Germany because it was the most philosophers and the most composers. They were so removed from their shadow state that it could threaten to overwhelm them. But you think about that. So let's say it's 2,000 years. We're going to use your number. It's a miracle. It's a staggering miracle that we should be celebrating and teaching continuously through all levels of education. And part of what happened is we decided to replace gratitude with grievance. And this comes down to, something that Dostoevsky remarked on, which was, if mankind ever found itself in a paradise, and there's a pretty good argument that life in America since World War II, despite obvious problems and injustices and et cetera, because we're humans on Earth and everything is inherently corrupt, we've lived in a version of paradise. And if you live in that and you're softened enough through enough generations, people will tear it all apart just to have something to argue over. And you can see a lot of this in what's happening. There's a lot of people everybody wants to be, the guy standing up to the tank in Tiananmen Square. Everybody thinks they'd be Harriet Tubman running the Underground Railroad, or they want to be Schindler. And there's no stakes for them to find that. And they're not content with doing real work in the real world. And so we're blowing up just an unbelievable gift that's nearly unprecedented in the history and record of mankind, because we're viewing everything through a lens of grievance rather than gratitude. And that choke that we have on recognition for our traditions and foundations that give us everything around us. Like we're not even born on third base, man. We're born like 3 feet from home plate. And without recognition of that, we're at a lot of risk of letting grievance tear ourselves apart.
Yeah.
A symbol is something that unites two things that are opposite and uplifts it. And the word diabolical, it's affiliated with a Latin phrase originally that means to tear into pieces and to disintegrate. And so symbols unite and uplift something, and we're in this diabolical process of breaking us all down into groups and subgroups and subgroups, and where everybody has to have their own grievance and their own lobby and their own fighting. And if we're losing what you talked about, which is that creedal nationalism, most important identity, if you're in a country, it has to be what the nation itself is, that gives us the actual freedoms and protection and safety that then allows us to be different, to think differently, to negotiate different problems, to argue about things, to convey our own future, to make our own stupid mistakes. It's what allows for all of that to happen. And if we don't get back to an understanding of how good we have it in every way, if we continue to let unmitigated damage come in through foreign regimes that are playing two sides against one another and elevate the idiocy of the extremes of both sides, we're in a shitload of trouble.
Yeah. So I wonder what you think, what makes people vulnerable to this bullshit? Because I think it's quite a bit easier to convince people to be agents of chaos or destructive and not creative if they don't see a positive future, if they don't see security for their property, if they don't see a return on their investment, that's people will trend towards nihilism in that regard. And this is why, if you read about property rights, whether it's from the Scots in the 18th century, 16th and 17th, 18th century, or whether you read about it from fucking Milton Friedman, this idea that security in property is something that drives people. You know what I mean? Nobody is going to work hard for a negative outcome that they know is going to be negative, or even there's a correlation between not how sure the investment will return, but how secure your store of value will be, and how hard somebody will work. You know what I mean? So to me, this is
Dick Hernstein did this experiment on rats.
Oh, really?
That if you give them like a little bit of heroin, or they will click less and less rather than working to get more. Like they'll find the lowest level that they have to click on. And so there's a lot of ways that you can luxuriate people out of hard work.
Yeah. So I guess what I wonder is there's not going to be a situation where there are bad ideologies. The concept of socialism isn't going to go anywhere because that's the dark side of empathy, right? It's not going anywhere. We're going to have to face this into perpetuity, just like we'll have to face sophistry into perpetuity, just like we'll have to face fascism. Like things should be this way and we should do whatever we can to make them that way. Well, no, we don't do outcomes here. We do justice. You know what I mean? Justice and choice. That's how we've aligned ourselves. So, and we're also not going to stop, especially not in the technological age, being constantly attacked from foreign adversaries on these subjects. So what I think would be prudent is to develop some kind of means of resistance that's prophylactic.
Yes.
You know, and you got to be careful because just throwing military parades and shit like that seems very jingoistic. It seems like it's kind of cringy, to be honest. As somebody who was in the military, it doesn't really seeing cool planes fly over at a football game is cool, but seeing tanks drive down the streets of our capital is not something I'm interested in. I don't know. Honestly, I don't even know if I can articulate the difference between the two because functionally they're the same thing, but I don't like it. It doesn't make me feel good to see that.
One feels celebratory and one feels like a flex for power.
Yeah, so it's like I wonder, and this is America's 250th birthday coming up. There's going to be quite a bit of celebration going on. There's going to be quite a bit of aircraft. I don't know if they're going to do anything with tanks. I'm not talking shit or anything. I don't know, but I'm saying that's part of it. The spectacle is certainly part of it, right? We have fucking celebrations on 4th of July and Christmas for a reason, to celebrate the things that we believe in. But part of it is understanding why we're celebrating it. And I don't know that you're just going to get the average person who's got a 9-to-5 job to get super deep into the history of the Constitution and understand really the gift that they've been given. That's a hard sell.
It is a hard sell. I think we cannot underestimate the amount of damage that the long march through the institutions from the far left has done in terms of education. Because once you can tell people to not read literature and thinkers because they're colonialist thinkers, you're in a lot of trouble. I mean, if you're not reading Orwell, let's say, he's a colonialist thinker, right? You're not reading Dostoevsky. You're not reading, the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. We go down a list that goes on forever, right? If you're not reading American history in a way that you understand it before you're criticizing it for its shortcomings, if you can sever people off from the past, from their foundation, then what you're raising is a generation of people who have completely untrained minds and that don't understand the things. Like, I learned a lot of what I think about mobs from Mark Twain. Like, we learn things from reading these source baseline materials. And I saw that happening, it was coming on in the mid 90s when I was in college, but where I can't read Huck Finn because it's an offensive document and it's too hard for me to read. It's like, wait a minute, that's like one of the most anti-racist documents ever created, along with the Emancipation Proclamation. Like, you can't handle that. And if you can sever people from the sources of learning, then it's very, very difficult because they don't have any foundation to build it upon.
Sure.
I mean, the other thing that's happened is, and I've cited this statistic and been criticized for it, and it's fair because it's an imperfect statistic, but about $60 trillion with a T since Reagan has gone from the bottom 90% in America to the top 1%. Some of that's globalism, right? Some of that is fair enough. That's how business works. People get rich and compete. But some of that is due to codified corruption, lobbyist capture, and regulatory capture. And that's bullshit. That's people who make money, change the rules, and pull the rug out. And so I think that's had an incredibly damaging effect. There's a third problem, I think, that is primary, which is for the past decades, the correlation between how many people want a law to exist or want a law to change or have a bill be written into law and it actually happening. It's a 0% correlation. And so it's very problematic if we come on and talk about the threat to democracy and everything's under attack. Things haven't been working very well for a lot of people for a lot of years. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. And so I do think we have to go back to solving real concrete problems in the real world in real ways, rather than feeding into whether codified or covert corruption on both sides. You know, you jingle loose a whole bunch of money and you feed it into a city. I mean, I forget what the numbers are and how much California has spent on every homeless person, but it's a staggering
The
amount.
county spends $2 billion a year.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
A year.
And so where that goes is through a lot of codified corruption channels. There's a lot of people with a lot of salaries who are getting paid to continue to not fix the problem in ways that's ongoing. So we need to get back, I think, first and foremost. You talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People start with, can I feed my kid? Do I have a roof over my head? If we start to focus on real change, on real concrete solutions with measurable results and I think transparency is the key to all of this. How much money is being spent? How is it being spent? What's the timeline? How did it work? What are the outcomes? Even reporting back with failures. It's not like we're going to take a swing at homelessness and just get it all right magically. But just to have transparency and accountability to say, we tried these 3 models. These 2 tanked terribly. This one's working. We're pivoting over here.
Yeah.
Here's where the salaries are going. Here's how things are getting paid. When distrust is this high in politics and in institutions, we need to start with radical transparency, and we need to start with concrete solutions in the real world and be open about the measurable results or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And we need to get on top of the education system of raising people to understand what's the core set of shared American values without screaming, running away, waving our hands over our heads with any notion of nationalism and patriotism as being something that's terrifying, that's going to eat us up.
Yeah, there's the administrative state has done. I think the administrative state has done more damage to our country than anything else, for a number of reasons. But the most important is that it is one of the many ways that Congress has abdicated their authority and responsibility. People on the left right now are bitching about Trump doing tariff stuff, although, I mean, you should pay attention because the numbers are looking pretty good. But they're bitching about war powers stuff. It's like, okay, well, Congress did that. Congress has passed 4 separate bills in the last 100 years abdicating their tariff collecting authority to the president. And the AUMF is still operational as well. It's like, okay. But even more so than those 2 things, because, there should be some, and I think there's an inverse relation, again, not to get off on a rant, but the less friction there is between the branches, executive and legislative, the more likely you get extremism in either one of those places.
Yes.
Because the friction dulls out the extremism. It requires you to work together. That's a feature, not a bug in our system, by the way.
And the administrative state that you're talking about, look, it's so complicated. There's 2 sides. On the one side, that is how you actually write corruption into law. You don't have to answer. Right. I mean, there's bills passed that we can't negotiate our own drug prices for our own citizens because there's 3.5 lobbyists to every member of Congress from Big Pharma. There's insane stuff that has happened through those mechanisms.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have to track a path back if we're not going to just deteriorate into utter chaos through nihilism. Like,
you can't just cut it off entirely. Yeah.
Sorry?
You can't just cut things off at where you stand.
And like, we still need expertise. I was talking to Mehmet Oz about this. Like, at some point, it's like the track record of let's call it Big Pharma's, partnerships with the government have not gone particularly well. And when there was an incredibly condescending approach about COVID and vaccinations and pandemic lockdown, people are forgetting in a lot of the districts and states where this was a problem, the last big collaboration that we had between Big Pharma and government was the opioid epidemic. Like, it's a mess.
Yeah.
But by the same time, and it's something that Dr. Oz has said, we still need experts. We still need doctors. It's not like we want to just wash everything away and anybody with a Twitter handle is going to be giving you all the advice. We want heterodoxic thinking. We want transparency. We obviously want open discourse and a free marketplace of ideas. But that kind of expertise and growth within institutions and centering expertise within experts, the difference is that has to be earned. It cannot be coerced. You can't condescend and shame people into obeying anymore because a lot of things have been gotten wrong.
Yeah.
But we don't want to do away with it. To build trust, we require transparency and humility of outreach. And those are two things that I think are lacking right now.
Well, there's no way to do it inside of an administrative state because what it is the transfer of lawmaking power from people who are accountable to voters to people who are not. That's essentially what it is, and it's done on purpose. Congress decided to do this because they didn't want to make hard decisions because hard decisions come back to haunt you sometimes. But this is a function like being a politician was not supposed to be a career in this country.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And once people decided that they were going to spend 40 years there, they had to figure out a way to spend 40 years there.
And one of the things anyone knows if we stop and think for a minute is we are what we do. Like I'm a writer not because I say I am or what all the book tours are, all this shit, which is super fun, which I love doing. It's because day in and day out, I have my ass in my chair and I'm writing. You are what we do. The recommendation right now, if somebody wins a seat in Congress, is they spend 25 hours a week on fundraising calls. That's the baseline recommendation. At least it was from the DNC. So now let's say you're in Orange County, okay? So you have 25 hours a week that you're making fundraising calls. You're flying to the Capitol once a week. I mean, what's that? At least 8 hours door to door, let's say. Then you're on committees and subcommittees. There's very little room to do actual visionary thinking and to figure out other stuff. I mean, I don't know. You've probably done meetings on the Hill, but every time you're in there, there's the clock, there's the buzz, there's the staffers who hover in the door. We got to go. They're charming in the room. They get pulled out. It's designed to be in a constant flurry. And so it's glad handing. And if you're spending the majority of your working hours fundraising, then you're primarily a fundraiser. You're not primarily representative of the people.
Yeah.
And so we have all sorts of incentive structures out of whack, which is one of the things we keep coming back to. And to reestablish, it's like we have a pretty clear hierarchy should we choose to want to use it.
Yeah.
At the top, it's got to be truth. I think for anything within administration when distrust is high, it has to be transparency, including mistakes. Hey, we tried this. It didn't work. Here's how it didn't work. Here's what we're going to do to fix it.
Yeah.
Anything that's like that.
I don't think I agree. I don't think we should get rid of expertise. That's retarded. But I don't think it's It's certainly not expertise, but I don't think it's truth or transparency that confers legitimacy either. I think it's consent, ultimately, right? And all those other things flow from that.
I think the other things are what help you earn the free consent.
Yeah, that's it. So consent is at the top, and those other things are what allow for consent to happen. If I lie to you, then you've not consented to me.
Yep.
If I hide things from you, then you've not consented to me.
Yes.
Right?
And so it's a difference of where so let's say I'm an expert in medicine. If my internal value set is I'm going to tack completely to the truth as best as I possibly can, regardless of anything else, and I will be transparent about that process, that puts me in a position to earn somebody's consent.
Yeah. So that's like, what are the elements of that? Because in the administrative state, or in any, and it doesn't matter where you are, delegation abdicates responsibility to some degree, right? These politicians like to say the buck stops with me, but it's not true, because what they'll say is, oh, that's how the system works, or it's too hard,
or I don't know, my staffer posted that. I didn't know about it.
Like John Thune, talking about trying to pass the Save America Act, said that it would take too much time if they required a standing filibuster. That was his statement. What are you fucking talking about, right? So he points again to the system. I'm helpless. I'm just the guy you voted for. I can't do anything, and it's why, and it's brilliant, frankly, right, from a psychological standpoint, because people will accept that answer at large. They'll accept stupid ass answers like that, which is why. And I know that you read Twitter and see people yelling at him for it, but I'm telling you, people accept it, and here's the proof. Institutions have lower positivity ratings than the individuals who are in them. Always. That is always the case. The lowest rated member of Congress, either house, is Mitch McConnell right now. I think he's at like 35%. Congress as a whole, 15%.
Yeah, Congress as a whole has a worse rating than like syphilis.
It has a worse. There's never been a politician, except for maybe in a week when they did something really stupid, like that weirdo in fucking New York. cross-dresser guy. What the fuck was his name? George something?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Santos?
Santos, that's it, yeah.
Right.
But the ATF,
The institution
the IRS, they will. The institution, the bureaucracy will always have a lower rating.
Yes.
So you just say, "Oh, it's that guy's fault," because everybody's already looking that direction. You know what I mean?
There's almost nothing I've done in my life that's worthwhile that the majority of people I would ask and common sense didn't dictate was impossible or close to it. And so the insistence, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest risks that people have when you get involved in politics or almost anything, even political commentary, is you get involved with something and you're trying to observe and change it, but it's hard to have close interaction with it without becoming of it. And you've seen that a lot where people will get elected to office, they have all their whatever, but you spend 25 hours a week, 30 hours a week fundraising, and you see them at the end of a 2-year term in Congress, and it's like a different human being. Everything is kind of canned speech. And you see it all the time with podcasters. There's people who come on who have a vigorous point of view that's robust. And if you don't choose carefully, and if you're just chasing views, and if you're just chasing guests within your ecosystem, and you're just building that, you can put yourself very easily into a silo where you're just surrounded by a typhoon of like-mindedness. And then off you go into whatever insanity. So it's but... Look, don't be afraid to do things that are impossible, because right now we're on the verge of a massive, massive adventure. I mean, everything's going to flip. The world's going to flip itself over right now. Power is being renegotiated at a scale that you and I haven't seen in our lifetime. And AI is going to change everything. And it's very important to remember that the unknown holds equal part threat and opportunity also. It's not that it's all threat. A lot of what we're seeing is it's a disaster, everything's going to be a nightmare. And it's like, okay, unless good people rise to do what is considered impossible by today's standards.
Yeah. I think social and political philosophy is a lot like jazz, not in it that it's chaotic, but that it's not enough to know what notes to play, as George Carlin used to say, but why those notes are meant to be played. You know what I mean? So I don't think it's enough to teach people civics. I think you have to teach them like mechanical fundamentals of thought first. You know what I mean? Like crawl, walk, run style, because it should be obvious to people that if you only read things that you 100% agree with, you will never progress. You won't learn shit that way. How can you? And also you will never, this is true. People who are, the reason people get louder and louder as they get more and more fundamentalist is because they don't believe what they're saying. People that believe what they're saying say it. They don't scream it. You don't have to. And that's my opinion. I think that
nor are they defensive. If someone comes on and takes a shot, I mean, I think if you believe what you say, you're also aware that the fool precedes the master all the time. And there's plenty of times you're going to be in a conversation and somebody points something out. And if you're willing to integrate and assimilate different information and be wrong, if you're secure enough to do that, you can learn and grow. And then you're very flexible. And then it's judo and it's not just boxing.
And one of the other fundamentals, aside from like the organon or the dialogues or the Socratic method or some of these ancient things, is the fact it's like your emotional relationship to reality. I think some people are fundamentally broken in this way because everything that you currently know, you either were ignorant about or wrong about all the way up until the point where you became correct. That is true for every human being that has ever existed. Literally everyone. You are not unique in that way. So why is it that there's so much shame attached to the idea of being wrong and that transition to being correct? Why is there so much shame attached to that? It doesn't make any sense. Like, I know I'm autistic as shit, so obviously it doesn't make sense to me because it's a mechanical failure in our thinking, and that I have to do away with those, right? My brain can't tolerate it. But even...
Say that again? It's a mechanical...
It's a mechanical failure in our thinking, and my brain can't tolerate it.
I see.
It's like I'm looking at it's computer code. And
you're not going to hide behind shame to continue to be wrong about something.
Yes, that code doesn't work, so it has to go. Like, my brain won't tolerate it. And I know that's not true for most people, but still, this should be fucking obvious. It should be obvious. And it should be, you should feel ashamed of persisting in delusion, not in changing.
Ralph Waldo Emerson, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds.
Or Carl Sagan, for me, it's far better to accept reality as it is rather than persist in delusion, no matter how gratifying the delusion. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like,
But look, for you, it's not just because you're autistic as shit, as you say. It's because you've also entered into competitions, jobs, missions where the stakes are literally life or death. You've been acquainted with real life stakes. So if you're going out and doing those things where the outcome of failure or inability to engage with reality is going to get you killed or is going to get you, then you can't do that. So much of this is how hard we get banged up. Like I remember when I first went, I mentioned I went to a Jesuit high school as a kind of very not religious Jewish kid. And I had my, very liberal background. I had all my talking points on abortion. I went into Christian morality class. And the Jesuits, who I have a ton of respect for in terms of how they educate. I mean, there's amazing educators. But I remember the first time, laid out the whole argument, and the priest who taught the class was like, "That's great, Mr. Hurwitz. Now argue it from the other side. Make any argument that you want. Argue it from the other side."
Yeah, you remember Lincoln Douglas debates where you were assigned the defense, or
you choose.
Yeah, you don't get to. They never ask. I did this in middle and high school. The coordinator or the professor or the teacher or whatever doesn't ask you what you think. Okay, go defend that. They assign you a topic, and you have to either support or defend it or go against it.
Doesn't matter what you think.
You know what I mean?
Like you got to argue against the death penalty. There you go, Dan. And part of what that does is, and look, I think this is also so much. So there's some among the great American inventions. We have jazz, we have bourbon, and we have a liberal arts education. What's amazing about a liberal arts education, if you go that route, is when you're in a history class, you think like a historian. If you're in a lab, you think like a scientist. You subvert yourself into different modes of thinking that train your brain through all these different avenues by which to approach reality. And if I were to go in and be like, I'm Jewish and this is offensive to me because blah, 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 or I have this issue emotionally and so I want the class to be taught differently that's tailored to me. What you're doing is you're taking your individual status or identity and you're putting it above learning the discipline of thinking and getting your mind iron in a certain way. And all of these are they're like spokes on a wheel. All of them are trying to point, however imperfectly, towards truth, and they're strengthening you because these are all different dominance hierarchies that you're competing on. So if you can think like an artist and you can think like a writer and you can think like a historian and you can think like a mathematician and you can think like a lab scientist, you have a pretty trained mind then, and you're learning to occupy different modes of thought with different sub-ethics in a way where your individualism isn't what's at the top, nor is a bunch of partisan bullshit at the top, because all that is a ideological possession, right? My pain and suffering and self-identity are the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
Or this set of, bullshit Marxist reasoning about oppressor-victim narratives subvert everything, including mathematics and whether I can be on time or not to class. It's a cheat. It's armoring yourself with things that rigidify you into an inability to engage with thought and process and reality. And that's a really big part of it. I mean, I think in some ways, I think that people who have jobs where they build shit and work with their hands have an inherent advantage because if you're fitting pipes, you're engaged with something that works or doesn't work in real time. It's not like you're getting some aspect of your thesis wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of room, or there can be more room. And I'm not being, just adoring of all blue collar work or anything like that. But there are jobs when you have to deal with concrete reality and fix things and make things run and understand how they work and get shit done and have tangible work. You're planning stuff and you're pouring stuff. It's very different. And in intellectual arenas, the more that gets detached from true learning, which is trying to build a disciplined mind, you go back to the Stoics a lot, right? Disciplined, hardcore mind. It should be a form of intellectual, almost like combat, and you're constantly dealing with and integrating. It's very easy to fall in love with yourself and float away. And that's in fact what Lucifer is in John Milton's Paradise Lost. When Lucifer gets hurled out of heaven, he's the intellect that falls in love with itself and can convince itself of anything. And you see that a lot ascendant among, I mean, I hate all these terms like elite and mainstream culture. They're also fucking captured. And that's also the point of some of this partisan sniping is it makes all the words captured. But we certainly see a lot of people who are furthering opinions where they're completely in love with their own ability to argue a point, even if it's immensely removed from common sense and common decency. That's a real risk there. You get abstract and you just kind of float away because you're untethered to anything that's real.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I think, part of, like, probably maybe one of the reasons people are so susceptible to sophistry now is that there have been some popular influencers like Rogan who have turned people on to learning new things, but nobody ever taught them how to process new information. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think a part of that, and something we're talking about now, but something that used to be kind of, day one in the learning process, and you could always see it you could always see the signs when it wasn't there, is learning how to think. Like this exercise where you figure out a way to spend some time after learning something new, making a falsifiable statement and then testing it somehow, figuring out a way to do it. Whether it's exposing it to other people and hearing what they have to say, or creating an experiment, or whatever it is, that's gone, right? So if you think about it as the Organon series, people skip steps 1 through 4, categories and post and prior analytics and everything, and they just go right to how to make an argument. And as a result, they end up in category 6, which is just sophistry, right? They're making arguments for something that are completely blind to anything else. And I think it's why you see more and more imbalance these days. So somebody posted something the other day, and it was, why is there such a high concentration of illegal immigrants in Democratic-run cities? I'm like, that's an observation for sure. That's the first thing, is to observe. Now let's do a couple of different theses on it. Maybe it's that Democrats are letting illegals pour into the country. To some degree, that's true. I don't think it's true in every city necessarily, but to some degree that is true. It's demonstrably true. But it's also the case that there are more jobs in cities, and that cities are almost entirely run by Democrats. So now you have two features that would create that scenario that are independent of any kind of nefariousness. You know what I mean?
Often more cheap housing solutions.
Correct,
too, for enclave communities.
There's a lot of reasons that would be true. There's a lot of reasons that would be true, aside from, just and there's other versions of that too. It's like from the conservative, another thing that conservatives bitch about is every state that has legalized marijuana, like wholesale legalized, right? Or had some kind of left-leaning libertarian view of drugs, has gone to shit. I'm like, yeah, certainly that's true. That is true. Denver's a fucking shithole now. But here are all the other elements that are coincidental to that belief.
Correlative or causative.
Yeah. Like Portugal didn't have the same issues that Portland did when they legalized drugs, because they still had treatment programs, they still had enforcement for dumbass behavior and stuff like that. It was wildly different. So if you can, even as a thought experiment, take your idea, make a falsifiable statement. Don't say this is true and here's why. Say this is what I think and here's the evidence for it. Those are two fundamentally different statements.
And don't also just sort it into your bullshit partisan thing that any chat GPT can spit out.
Yeah.
It's boring, you know?
It's fundamentally different to say here's a possibility and here's the reasons why it's true versus here's what I believe.
And almost nothing adheres. If you're fixing a problem in the real world, nothing's going to adhere to some ideology. You're going to need some liberal thought. You're going to need some conservative thought. You're going to need libertarian notions. Anytime you're dealing with reality, it's reality. I want to go back to, you talked about shame, and I think it's a really important thing to talk about, and people don't talk about it a lot. There's a couple things I think that have happened, which is, we've talked a lot about abdication of responsibility, right? In schools, for parents. There's a lot of parents who aren't raising their kids they're raising their kids to be their best friend, right? There's not as much a notion that we're preparing and raising our younger generations to think more vigorously. And I think one of the things that's happened is when we see younger generations right now that are lost to either, nihilism, let's say, or snowflakeism. Let's say those are two poles. I think part of what happens is that our reaction, the societal reaction to that sometimes, is that we are angry and we're driving their shame and our anger at them, because in a way it's covering our shame societally and as adults for the realization that, like, ultimately it's our fault. Like, what the children look like of any culture is the fault of who are supposed to be the ostensible adults. And I'm not saying that everyone has contributed to this equally, obviously. There's a lot of nefarious shit going on. There's a lot of negative ideology. But to some extent, it's like, let's say liberalism or conservatism had held like perfectly and transparently without corruption and capture, we'd have these very strong anchored aspects.
Yeah.
We've let a lot slide. And in a way, our denigration and fury and rage at these generations, I think in some ways is cover fire, in fact, for some of our own shame that we allowed this to happen. Because who's responsible for the youth of a country? There's a lot of ways in which I think we stepped off, and a lot of people have realized this and are coming forward and are working a lot more. And a lot of people have been in the good fight all the way through, certainly too. But there's an aspect of that too. And I think the other thing that we're seeing a lot of is, I've always had friends. My community and ecosystem is incredibly varied. It's 360 degrees around the wheel, in terms of proclivities, politics, jobs, shapes and sizes, the whole thing. There seems to be more and more groups where everybody is surrounded with people who just think precisely like them. And it's so interesting because, of course, if you have diversity as an ideological notion, of course, things become, there's a Greek phrase for this, which I always forget because I'm not as good with the ancients as you are, but there's a phrase for things that become the opposite of what they are. And so diversity in so many ways has led to an utter lack of diversity for actual viewpoints, right? It's a lack of viewpoint diversity. The phrase applies to other stuff like customer service, right? Things that become the opposite of what they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
But it's very damaging to have people in groups where they go and they're just surrounded with people who think like them. And then they're in their little online bubbles. My wife's a psychologist. She's been studying this for 20 years. If you can just click to unfriend people who offend you, who you don't like, I don't want to see that. We're getting pretty close to where you can remove your family members or put filters on, right? Every time that, crazy Uncle Bill, posts anything about whatever, I don't want to see it anymore. Like we can erase things out of our photographs. We can erase things out of our existence. We can craft our own reality in some ways. And I think one of the problems with that is we don't know what the fuck we want long term. We don't know what we think. We need a lot of chaos to move through. One of the metaphors I think about this as a novelist is, the demise of the old fashioned bookstore, where I remember like you walk through a bookstore and you see all these different books on tables with different things that you're going to bump into, as opposed to if you're ordering all your stuff online, the algorithm selects and it feeds you more and more of what you already like. And you're not having these detours into this book with a weird cover, or here's this super weird second wave feminist that I want to read, or here's this, crazy biography I never thought that I would read. Like, we're not browsing as widely in our bookstores, in our friendship groups, conversationally, the way that we used to, because we're eliminating the chaos of randomized interactions with ideas and people. And so in that way, I think this sort of streamlined luxury, part of this is pushing us all into being those blobs in WALL-E, where we're just sort of like drifting around in our own little worlds of our own making, as frictionless as can be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's... So I'm sure there's a good phrase for it. Social obesity, maybe. We're gluttonous when it comes to reinforcing our own beliefs, and that's junk food in a real way.
And that shame, that's got to be taught. Shame is a massively underutilized motivator. And like anything, it's very helpful if it's inoculative. If you're not inoculated to shame, like, look, you screwed that up. You lost a debate. Like, sit down. You were made a fool of in debate class freshman year. Okay, deal with it. Right? You don't have your parents come in and have a fucking meeting with the teacher and the guidance counselor and the dean. And, we need these inoculative measures in order to move on from it and understand it. I mean, and there's times when I've been in political conversations with high-ranking people where, I was in a conversation with one Republican. I was on a Zoom call with a bunch of, kind of big brains. This was early on in some of my political endeavors or extracurriculars. And we were talking about, regulatory stuff. And he said, this is a Republican congressman. He said, you liberals think that every time that we want to roll back regulations, it's because we want to dump toxins in rivers. Mm. And I just laughed. It was on the Zoom call. I go, you know what? You're exactly right. Like, that is literally the level of resolution that I have about this. So, like, hold, please. Let me get back to you. And it was just so funny to be called out from something. And it's, it's an area I hadn't looked at. So I talked to infrastructure experts. Like, I was looking into stuff. Part of what he was saying is, it takes 6 years to build an off-ramp in New York City now. Like, the extent of that regulatory capture was something where, getting called out in that way, there's an aspect that's embarrassing, certainly, on a call with other important people, but also it's invigorating. It's an opportunity. And so part of it is the more that we can connect to our curiosity. I think curiosity is a massively, massively under-practiced and underutilized trait right now.
Yeah.
The quicker you can move to curious about what you don't know and come back. And it's fine to go off and do a bunch of research and come back and go, hey, I still have my original viewpoint, but now I can back it up with more things.
Yeah.
Right? Let's knock some of the edges off this again and figure it out.
Yeah.
Getting people in touch with curiosity, it requires inoculative steps of failing along the way, being embarrassed along the way, having bursts of shame along the way.
But with a remedy, right? Because shame without a remedy turns to rage or nihilism. There's no in between on that.
And the other thing is that's really important, and this is another thing I don't think we talk about nearly enough, is the notion of forgiveness. So we're in a culture where when people do something that is outside of the perceived Overton window, which is constantly shrinking and changing and is fucked up. And, for your listeners who don't know the Overton window, that's the window of what is considered acceptable discussion in a society. But if people were getting canceled left and right based on kind of, I don't know, mob opinions that are powered by algorithms on social media, like we decide to do that instead of have people in a court of law, there's no mechanism back. What's the mechanism? So either people walk out and issue one of these stupid hostage statements where they're like, I'm sorry, I've examined my privilege, right? And so they issue a hostage statement to try and get everyone to be mad at them. But you can't apologize to a mob because a mob's not a thing.
No.
And all that happens then is half the mob knows that they own you forever because you're apologizing in a bullshitty way with language that isn't your own to use as a shield. But what is our actual mechanism if we're going to decide to export justice and legality out of the legal system? How do we have people find forgiveness and come back into a culture? You can't negotiate with countless people online. And so we've lost that aspect of forgiveness and mercy. And I think that's made the stakes for shame or admitting or feeling shame infinitely higher.
Yeah, you got to understand what that does to people too. So I've done some pretty extensive research on rites of passage for young men. And there's a couple of steps that happen in every one of them, no matter what culture throughout history there was. The first one is separation. You're taken away from mother's empathy. That's the first step. The second one is ordeal, some kind of pain. Like you have to, not physical, obviously, but historically
Often.
that's mostly been the case. Then comes instruction. After the pain, after you've shown you can't do that thing, okay, now here's how you can do it, right? Here's the lesson on how to do it. And then after you perform that task comes recognition. The other men in the tribe say, all right, good job, buddy. And then the last part is reintegration.
Yes.
And reintegration is the part where weight is now put on you. You're presented to the whole of the tribe as somebody who is competent and responsible, and weight is given to you. And if your relationship with trial and error is shame without a remedy, then you will never take responsibility in your life. You can't. Like it becomes impossible to do that. And our inability to take responsibility for things invariably leads to tyranny. We don't have the discipline to recognize that there are constitutional remedies, for example, to all of these problems we have. So people on either side of the aisle decide that we're going to make some extra constitutional remedy for it, and that is anti-American by its nature. We just don't have the discipline or the courage to use them. There's a phrase in Islam, which odd for me to quote it probably, but it goes something like, you can never be a true believer until you want for your brother what you want for yourself, right? That's the light side. The dark side is, that's the dark side. The more positive side of it, I'm sorry, I said that backwards.
Yep.
That is the positive side. The dark side of that is, if you stop holding yourself accountable, you lose the capability to hold anyone else accountable, and society deteriorates from there. We are a bottom-up society. We are governed by consent. That's the agreement of the people here. And if you lose that ability to carry weight and hold yourself accountable, then we lose our society. It's that simple, right?
And what you just described about the rites and rituals, that's actually what all the steps are of a hero's journey, right? A hero's journey. And look, I'm a novelist, right? I wanted to be a novelist from birth. I believe that stories are sacred, and they're sacred in how we function in the world. And if we found a tribe in the Amazon that's cut off from any other human interaction, from any other civilization, we know a bunch of things about them still. We know they're going to have opposable thumbs. We know they're going to have eyelids, and we know they're going to have a hero story with all the constituent steps.
Right.
And it embodies exactly what you said in ritual. So to move through it quickly, it's very interesting. It's also, the process of Jungian individuation, psychological development. There's all these things that kind of overlap in a way that's fractal. But, the thread is, you're in a castle. Here's the classic hero story. We'll walk through it real quick. There's a dragon, a fire-breathing dragon. So that's the devouring, terrible feminine, right? It's eating people in the castle. If you go hide from that, eventually it'll just come and eat you and destroy your village. If you choose to hide from the thing that scares you. And you have to go to face it, but you have to go face it voluntarily, right? So you get your shield, and your little shield tends to have a cross on it. It's a symbol from the culture. And off you go. You combat the dragon. The dragon's usually guarding either a woman or a pot of, a bunch of gold, which is weird, because why does a dragon need gold? It doesn't. But if you slay the dragon,
dragons actually eat treasure, Greg.
No, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize that. It's a digestive thing. And so part of that is that what the treasure is your own self-awareness that you can gain by voluntarily going to face your fear on behalf of your culture. That you can slay something that is fearsome and devouring. You gain your own self-knowledge. And then the last point is just what you said. It's reintegration. You come back. You remember Beowulf came back with Grendel's paw, and he nails it above the mantle. So what you learn, you take back to the culture, and that's your responsibility. And in a lot of cases, the thing you take back to the culture is, in fact, a story. And so that's sort of a weird way that the whole thing becomes circular, like the Ouroboros of a snake swallowing its own tail. And so these are the steps that teach us, if you have a hero's journey story, it teaches us how to deal with the unknown in the world externally and even internally in our own lives and our own psychology.
Yeah. It's weird. What we consider aesthetic now used to be a sign of survivability. You know what I mean? Like that people put the heads of large animals on their wall, but that began as a way to demonstrate your capability, not as an aesthetic.
That's right. It's like furniture books,
Yeah.
right? When people buy books with all white wrapped spines, or, all pink coated books, or they buy the old timey books that they've never cracked or read. And so the things that we lack from ritual, we start to participate in performatively.
Yeah. And then there's other parts of that rite of passage. It's called a pilgrimage, that are really important. One of them is that the ordeal confers, or it's inseparable from moral formation as well.
Yes.
Right. Like your reality, your moral reality as a young man, which means your responsibilities and the left and right limits of what is acceptable behavior are defined through that ordeal to some degree. Right? Like, here's a task you have to do here. In the military, we say task, condition, standard. Here's what you have to do. here are the conditions under which you have to do it, and here's the standard, approved standard for an end state. There's a reason that this stuff is all organized in such a way, right? And it's procedural too. It starts slow, and it starts slow. And even in our after action reports, we do this. I mean, it shows up pretty much everywhere. We do the first thing we do are corrections, and then we do things that went well. We start with the bad part. Like here's some. We do the exercise, and then we come huddle up in a school circle, semicircle, whatever you want to call it, and the cadres say, "Hey, here's what you fucked up," and then they go on like, "Here's what you did really well." Sustains and improves, we call them, right? And then we cap it off again with like, here's some very specific things you can improve on in the future. That is the I guess educational part before you get sent back out.
And it's tied to something that isn't merely abstract and intellectual. It's tied to an actual mission where the action is a ritualized set of behavior that pushes it down into, procedural memory versus, right? Procedural memory is like, can you ride a bike? So you can have a stroke and you can forget episodic memory. You don't remember who you are, where you are, but you still remember how to ride a bike. That's the importance of ritual too, is ritual, how you enact something, whether that's praying, whether that's hunting, whether that is you're learning to get it down into your limbic system almost. And so it's one of the things that's so great about the military is it is the subversion of the individual into a shared set of American values that are then ritualized with contact with the real world.
Yeah, there's and you can see its absence. I think we have a tendency to try to solve things as far downstream as possible, which is just the dumbest fucking way to do it. I mean, if you're a farmer, you know this. If you go try to treat a disease on the vine, you're fucked. It's already done at that point. But when men don't have this moral framework that comes from rites of passage and the weight that's put on them, they diverge into one of two groups. The first group is this manosphere that you see now, which is loud certainty unsupported by discipline or reality. They have no competence at anything, so they shout about what they can do, essentially. And then you have the other group, which is passivity disguised as virtue. That's the best I can call it.
Yes.
And it's the sneaky fucker, whatever you want to call it, but it trends towards nihilism, and nihilism trends towards violence at some point, whether to yourself or to somebody else. Ironically, I think there's less chance of violence for the manosphere people in a lot of ways than there are for the nihilistic crowd downstream, because there's hopelessness attached to them. You know what I mean? Well, there's nothing to lose at that point. This other guy has his identity, his fake identity that he's constructed to protect. This kid has nothing.
Yeah. So sneaky fucker, that's the chimpanzee mating technique where a little smaller chimpanzee will like rush in and like rape one of the females or whatever, and then run away before the bigger male can catch them. And that's, in some ways, that can describe the school shooter or serial killer. It's like, I'm so without, right? Nope. And basically rejection by women for men is utterly devastating. Like the rejection of a woman is basically a signal. It can be interpreted as a signal that says you are not fit to breed. And so one of the techniques of that, or one of the answers that people have to that, is to just go absolutely berserking. And then that's that weird phenomenon that you see, that a serial killer in prison will start to get marriage proposals. So it's a completely outsized aspect. There must be some evolutionary need for psychopathy in the culture that we keep this alive in some way within the gene pool. But, part of what you're saying reminds me so much of the fact that, Carl Jung said the power in a man's personality comes from his capacity to commit evil. It's so great. It's not when he does it. And I think that one of the biggest disasters that we've had from these last decades is the elevation of this notion of toxic masculinity, of trying to shut down boys from a young level with microaggressions, which are impossible to control, and to shut down their behavioral instincts to act like boys, to over-index. You injure yourself, you bang up, you get in a fight with somebody, right? You insult somebody, you hurt someone's feelings. And part of this is you have to understand how to have a certain amount of aggression that is controlled, that gets socialized, whether it's routed into positive things like sports or the military, but also there's going to be mistakes along the way because everyone's human. Men are going to make their own kinds of mistakes. Women are going to make their own kinds of mistakes. Sometimes they'll make mistakes that don't fit into any gender, but they're just fucked up because we're humans who are fucked up. But the phrase, I never understood the phrase, the meek shall inherit the earth, because it seems so weird where you're like, why should the meek inherit anything? There's an interpretation. It's not a primary one, but it's one of the things. And this is something Jordan Peterson has pointed to, where what meek means or can be interpreted to mean in certain contexts is those who have swords but keep them sheathed. Which means that if you know how to use your sword, if you know how to use your weapon, if you've been hardened by that, and people know it, but you keep it on your hip, and then you engage in a conflict or a menace or a threat in a way that can be positive and transformational, you need the backing of that, of people to know that you know how to use that sword, right? You know how to throw that fist.
Well, it's in there. It's in that passage in the Beatitudes, because that's 5:5, 5:7 says, blessed are those who are merciful. Well, you can't be merciful unless you have power.
Yes.
It has no meaning.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think this is, you can get into some pretty dire straits if you start reading individual sentences in books and then conferring meaning outside of it onto things. It's a problem that a lot of people have. But it's, to me, fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's about what you're describing as choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's not a choice to say, I want no role in, capitalism. It's like, you can't go compete and build a business, right? You're not making a choice. It doesn't mean anything.
No.
You're covering your incompetence, your fecklessness, and your lack of courage to compete in the world in some ways by just insulting and denigrating something you don't have a shot to do anyways.
Like calling a girl a lesbian because she's not interested in you.
Exactly.
It's pretty common when you and I were in school back in the day. It's probably less so now, but that's the thing. And it's about choice and risk, which is what everything in life is about. Because without options, or I could say without temptation, loyalty has no meaning.
Yeah, and also, like, if you're afraid of what strong men can do, you should be terrified at what weak men are capable of.
Yeah. This is the reason that I brought that up in the first place, and why it's always a big part of these conversations is because, again, we solve problems downstream. I want to go out into the free market of ideas and counter signal things that are negative for my culture, because I care about my culture. But and certainly there's something important about doing that. But something much more important is going way farther upstream and affecting change to the type of incentive structures and preparation we have for these young men. Because if we don't do that, then one, this battle gets harder and harder as time goes on, and eventually you just lose it completely and lose your culture. But two, you're reactive, and action is faster than reaction. You know what I mean? I don't like these ideas that we should play the games of the postmodernists, because they're members of this current administration that like to do that. They talk about power a lot, and that is not, as I mentioned, you and I have discussed this, and I've written about it at great length. It's not a conservative argument in any way, but it also, the obsession with power focuses your attention on the end state instead of the preparation. And there is no way to win that way. If some NBA player was constantly lobbying for rule changes to benefit their skill set rather than learning new skill sets to face reality, that person would not be in the league. Because that's retarded, right? But two, they would have no respect from anyone. But yet, that is the modus operandi for almost anybody in politics right now. Is just trying to shift power and rules for outcomes that they want, rather than doing the procedural work, we need a fundamental change in the way we do procedural work on young men, starting from the time they're probably about between 5 and 8 years old. I do it every day. And if you think about this, I'll explain some of the mechanics of it, but not to get into the weeds, but because I think it's very important. A 5-year-old child looks at mom, and that is his obsession. His obsession is mother. I love mother, right? So if I can teach him how to treat that woman correctly, the game is over. Nobody can break him at that point because he knows how to be a man, right? Like if he knows that, special attention must be paid to this person in this particular way, and not only must it, but it's your responsibility to do it. You've given weight of an adult to a child in a way that he can contextualize it, and everything is rooted in that for the rest of his life. I see the benefit of it immediately, right? I see a kid that takes responsibility for his actions at an age where he probably shouldn't, right? A kid that goes around to the other side of the door, excuse me, to open the door for his mom, even though opening the door itself is a struggle because he's little, you know what I mean? Or like the other day, there's they're coming back from grocery shopping after school, and he won't let her carry the bags inside. That's something that will stay with him forever now, and it's just a little thing. It's seemingly meaningless, to be honest. Like, oh, he's just a sweet kid. Look at how sweet he is. It's not about being sweet. It's about responsibility, and the secondary result of that is that while he's always had a pretty good relationship with his little brother, now he's doing big brother things, which is different than having a friend. It's different to like see little brother having problems and go comfort him, or see him shy about joining a group event and bringing him into the group. That's two different things, right? Yep. So it permeates through all of life at this point. And these are things that are very easy to do, frankly. And it isn't limited to just your family. Treat the people in front of children, especially, treat the people in your life respectfully in a way that conveys that message. And I don't think there's no amount of writing or talking I can do that'll do more than I just did there. Right.
You've talked about 3 things. Power, right, with politicians. And then a lot of this is, people in the culture generally are very geared right now towards freedom and rights. Power, freedom, and rights, those 3 things give way very, very quickly to grievance. And the point of them, what's necessary to carry any of them, is responsibility, which is what you always come back to. The point of freedom isn't just for, total hedonistic, individualistic expression, which is something that we've been preaching and has been ascendant in the culture. The point of freedom is to choose what responsibilities you're going to take on to make yourself better and the people you love better and the community better and the country better and the world better. That's the whole point of it. If we don't have responsibility as the end goal of it, and instead we just have a focus, well, these are all of my rights. It's like, okay, well, you have a lot of rights, absolutely, but what are you going to do with them? It's such an important thing, because I think responsibility is what you shoulder and carry is what orients you towards meaning. And we have not been emphasizing that very much culturally. No,
this is a true statement. Every civilization will initiate its men, or will pay the price for not doing so. And right now we're paying that price in a big way. And the only way to do it is to put weight on them gradually, right? And then sometimes all at once as well. But without doing it, manhood doesn't come, you can't confer it onto somebody. You can't announce it, right? It has to be, it can't emerge spontaneously. It's only shaped through the process, through difficulty. So what we have are a bunch of adult men who are the immature masculine, is what the hippies call it, but that's what it is, right? It's a guy who's got all the features of a man, but none of the constitution of one.
That's right.
and that's a fucking problem. Okay, so the reason you came here today was not to wax poetic with me, but to talk about your book release. So tell me what got you into and I'm sure one of the reasons we've grown so close is because of the books. I think, and in a lot of ways, because it's what drew me to you in the first place. Because the story, like you've written other stuff certainly, but the story of Evan is a story of self-discovery. Really, it's about a guy who's got all the attributes of a man, of an elite man, actually, but none of the constitutional one in the ways that we see it interacting with society. Right? He's got a strong constitution, but in a way that benefits a task, not that benefits society necessarily, and the people around him. And over the course of 11 books, he's become a thoughtful person that can now benefit not just violently, but like emotionally the people around him, which is a different thing, right? So tell me why you started writing that one in the first place. Was this a plan all along?
It was
to like develop a guy over the course of 11 books, or what was it?
It was a plan to do a series for sure. I was pretty scared to write it, man. I had a notion, and look, I grew up, with Bourne and Bond, and I love Reacher. I love all these series, and I knew that I wanted to write a longer series, but I kept writing another book first, and then another book first, and I kept backburnering it till I could figure out the things I wanted. Orphan X one day to have a shot at standing in that pantheon. And so I took a long time thinking through what I wanted that to be. And one of the biggest turns that I had, so he's taken out of a foster home at the age of 12. He's raised under the very tough tutelage of a handler, former CIA station agent who becomes like a father figure to him. His name's Jack Johns. And one of the revelations I had about it, that story on its own isn't like stunningly unique, that a kid is taken out of society and trained to be a killer. David Morrell played in those waters, right? Black Widow from Marvel Universe has played in that. We've seen this, La Femme Nikita. But one of the things that I had an idea about was, what if the guy who raises him and trains him in this silo, brutally trains him, loves this kid and wants what's best for him and doesn't just train him into being a senseless murderous weapon, though that's part of what he's doing, but he educates him in all these different ways to keep him alive, but also to keep his humanity intact. And so one of the things Jack Johns tells Evan when he's 12 is, the hard part won't be making you a killer. The hard part's going to be keeping you human.
Right.
And what the series is about is really, it's a very different thriller series from most. Most thriller series are about, Carl Jung I've mentioned a few times. He's, Freud's greatest student, and his thinking's had a big impact. So the shadow, when we talk about the shadow, most of your listeners are going to know what that is. Most thriller series are about kind of shadow integration, right? That's Batman. The stage after shadow integration, and this is really relevant to the whole conversation we're having, is anima integration for men, or animus for women, where you integrate as a man the positive feminine. You define your relationship with the feminine. You don't just see it that you're terrified of it as the devouring feminine, which is like the dragon, but you integrate it and you start to understand it. And so through the course of this series, I've really written the story of an elite assassin, the greatest assassin of this generation or any other, who wants to actually learn the one thing he was never taught, which is how to speak the strange language of intimacy. And as he becomes more human, the people around him become more human, and he starts to have actual meaningful relationships. And the people who he kills, he starts to see them also as being more human and more rounded. And so he's learning, and he gets these little pieces of himself back along the way. I think one of the things that's interesting is I started writing this, I was about 38 when I started it. The first book came out, I was just after I turned 40. And Evan is raised under Jack with the 10 Assassin's Commandments, which I actually have here inside my jacket. I've got the 10 Commandments because I have a crazy tailor who just sends me stuff from the books. And those are like, assume nothing. How you do anything's how you do everything. Never make it personal. They're the rules that bind the world. And the first Orphan X book, he breaks all 10 of them. It's the process of somebody who's moving from a binary view of the world into a way more complicated world of all the messiness of human interaction and of human intimacy. And along the way, there is this kick-ass series of thriller books, but what it's about is him integrating a new worldview that's way more complicated and is way more messy and involves different types of goodness around him. And I think it's part of what I was doing probably on the cusp of 40, which is when I was sort of laying down a lot of the stories that had driven the first half of my life, what, you know, I hope will be the first half of my life if a grand piano doesn't fall on my head, into a different kind of understanding of myself. And so I think of the series in a lot of ways like it opens where most series end, where Evan comes to an awareness in the first book, almost like he's Pinocchio. He's an archetypal thriller hero, but he wants to be a real boy. And the series is his process of figuring that out. And the newest book is called Antihero, and it's very different because there's a woman at the center of it. Her name is Anka. I mentioned this earlier. And she's kidnapped off a subway in New York, and she's just brutalized by this pack of young nihilistic men who then flee. And Evan comes in, and he finds her, and he's in pursuit. And Evan has visited untold brutality and vengeance across the last 10 books in major ways.
Yeah.
But Anka is a devout Orthodox Christian, and she makes him vow that he will not kill anyone in her name. And so a lot of this was, and we referred to this earlier, he can't just steal her suffering and take that on and enact a vengeance that's his and not hers, but he's going into this mission for the first time with both arms tied behind his back. He's going into lethal circumstances, and he's going up against very, very dangerous young men who are utterly nihilistic. And he's got to see if he can manage to do this without killing them and still come out alive and still try to have some transformational change that's the type that she wants because he's acting on her behalf. So it's in some ways is the most impossible mission he's ever been on.
Okay, so I have some questions about this process. I mean, one of the overarching themes is always that it's a new challenge, obviously, right? Because it's character progression. In this case, though, it's not. It's like a fundamental identity issue because I am the guy who solves problems in this way. And now I'm being told I can't, and he has to reflect on that. Like, do I have the right to do this even though she doesn't want to? And there's a lot of other stuff going on there too because no spoilers, but it's the kind of group of people that have done it before and are gonna do it again, right? Obviously, I mean that's written into it. So, but even then, and even if that weren't the case, that would be your suspicion. Nobody does that for the first time, typically. So for him, there's going to be a conversation between himself as somebody who wants to do this thing or who feels like it's necessary versus her who just doesn't want to do it and doesn't know that it's necessary, maybe, right? That's really interesting to me. You know what I mean? Just like it's how you take fundamentally different ideas and marry them together in reality.
Well, and her challenge to him in a lot of ways is, you know, she asks him at one point, what do you answer to? And he says, nothing. And like she says, a man who answers to nothing is very dangerous because Evan's a vigilante. He was at one time he was, you know, executing people under a black program out of the DOD, right? But he was going places the U.S. can't go to kill people who they're not allowed to kill. But he was under some sort of structure, even if it was a black ops program. But right now he doesn't answer to anybody. And so she's really challenging him to say, you know, he's going after these people, but what she wants is some sort of change that will be transformational in the culture or in the society. And she is adamant that she will not define herself as a victim, even though she's been brutalized. Yeah. And so part of that is to not, you know, and so he's up against that in a way that's very challenging because, you know, he can take on her suffering, he can steal her suffering and then enact a vengeance that's what he wants, that's not what she wants, but she's actually the person who's the subject. And so it's a very difficult. And so, you know, one of the things that happened, I don't ever think of books in terms of themes down the stories. The stories occur to me. And then as I'm writing it down, I start to recognize what the themes are. But he's got a code, right? He's got the Assassin's 10 Commandments and the new parts of that he's integrating. She certainly has a code that's a higher code. Hers is a religious code. She's an Orthodox Christian. And the opposite of a code is nihilism. There's this pack of young men who are rudderless, who have been raised just on porn and video games and constantly online. I write from their first person perspective to just sort of show where they are in the world and how they move through the world. And the world itself is almost not real to them. Other people almost aren't real to them. Human suffering isn't real to them. They're completely detached. And what's the solution to that? How do you go up against that in a way that you hope is transformational, to take brutality and suffering and try to have that answered for in some way that's more general? And so those are the questions that Evan's up against here.
Yeah. I mean, it's, when she said, I remember reading or listening to it actually, but I remember that part of the book, and my first reaction was, it's not true that he answers to nothing. I know
Nobody.
That's what he said, right? But it's not true, because he answers. You mentioned the code. He has his own internal values, obviously, but more importantly than either one of those is the anchor point in his life, which at the moment is Joey, right? His what's the reverse of uncle daughter? I'm sorry, uncle father,
uncle person,
person,
his niece, niece person.
Yeah, because there's no rule and the commandments or anywhere else that exists or could exist that he would follow that put her in harm's way.
That's right.
And that's true of every good human being.
Right.
We have our fundamentalist rules that we think define us as a person, but the reality.
Yeah, someone puts a gun to your kid's head and they're all out the window.
The reality that, the intersection of your theory and reality in that regard is how your fundamental beliefs affect the people that you love. That's how it should work, actually, because at the end of the day, the way that you interact with and as a man protect the people you love is who you are, right? Everybody makes exceptions to every single rule you have for the people you love, and you should. That's how you must. And part of growing as a human being, but especially as a man, is trying to narrow that gap somehow, finding ways to accomplish the goals for the people you love without breaking your code. I think that's like, if you can focus your efforts as a man on narrowing that gap, you will get better and better for every day for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and it's not an answer to break it all the time on behalf of people who you love.
Correct.
Either.
Yeah. No, it's a
funny
struggle.
You mentioned that, and you had that reaction about Joey. So Josephine she's a brilliant hacker. She's a washout from the orphan program that made him. And he came upon her earlier in the series in book 3 in Hellbent. And she's just was a pain in the ass. He didn't want almost anything to do with her. And I actually planned to kill her at the end of that book, at the end of Hellbent. It's my 3rd book. And I just loved her engagement with him so much. I loved writing her so much. She brought out all these facets of him that I couldn't do it. I mean, I had it. That was the whole game plan. And I got to the scene and I just was like, I got to keep this kid around. And so she is the most human relationship that he's ever had, and he cares about her a lot. It's very interesting that you raise that, because one of the other things he's negotiating in this book very heavily is his relationship with Joey. This is the first book he's brought her along on a mission. She's a brilliant hacker, but he brings her out to Luke Devine's house. Luke Devine's like this genius billionaire who's having a manic breakdown at the opening of the book. And his fear when he's confronting these nihilists comes to a head just knowing and dealing with the world that he is putting her in, that causes a very big dislocation in their relationship. He doesn't know how to maintain that vulnerability of caring for her and having that intimacy in the face of this mission and everything he's seeing. And he wants to revert to an earlier version of himself, which is much more lone wolf. And so, you're right in that regard. And there's a reason why that thread of the plot is it's such a throbbing wound in this book, is because that's what he's up against.
But it's been growing and opening for 7 books, right? And I think that's a big part of his. Let's say that's his hero journey, but it isn't just her. You can see Candy McClure's character growing as well. And the reason that she's growing is because he's put moral responsibility on her, and she's reacting to it. And I guess the broader point is the rhetorical question: how do you get to Carnegie Hall? It's practice, right? It's to take your set of ethics and apply it to the real world and refine it over time and have the courage to fail. And that's the only way that you can become a human being. I think otherwise you're just an NPC. You're like blank programming code, just running out your processes. You know
That's
what I mean?
right.
That's nothing.
And that's that realization he has. It's funny because when Jack Johns raises him to keep that pilot light of humanity intact in him, in a way it feels like a curse because it's way easier to just be a true believer. If you're a zealot, you have all the questions are answered for you. And that
But there's a correlation between the level of problem you can solve though as a true believer.
There's no question.
That's a limitation.
You can't ever be
well.
transformational.
That's right.
Yeah. And so that is something for him that he's been working on and working towards throughout the whole series. And that's that realization he has of like, oh, wait a minute. I'm like a archetypal thriller hero, you know, I'm in the world, I adhere to all these things, and it's the shattering of that worldview into something new and that vulnerability that I was really exploring. And I think a lot of that is I was figuring out a lot of that shit at 40. 40 was murder for me. 50 was way easier for me. 50 was great, turning 50. I'm
You explored a lot of this shit in Nemesis too, just with like, again, he's got this code, and then he has this man, Tommy, that he loves.
Tommy's his armor. Yeah.
And Tommy is closer to reality on this particular situation than Evan is, so he has perspective, and Evan can't come to terms with Tommy's perspective, and it makes him question Tommy's character and identity.
Yeah, they go up against to kill each other. I mean, that Nemesis, it's funny, if Antihero for me is a lot about nihilism and how to contend with nihilism, Nemesis is a lot about tribalism. Right, because Tommy's definitely more red state, even though none of this is overtly political, because that's just annoying in a thriller, But Evan grew up in cities. Evan grew up in a foster home, right? Surrounded, like all his foster brothers were, black and Hispanic and everything. And Tommy's way more kind of rural. And Tommy's out in Nemesis. He's dealing with these guys, these kind of shithead young men who grew up fatherless, very rudderless. They're in a militia. They're shitty at everything. They don't know how to deal with their guns. They're even shitty at being racist.
Yeah.
But they've done some horrible shit. And Evan winds up, because his code crosses with Tommy's, he's coming for Tommy and he's coming for these kids. And it's these young men, I should say. And it's the first time in the series, I think, where readers are voting against Evan. Like it's because it's very hard to hate people up close.
Right.
And because I go with Tommy into the lives of these young men and we're seeing them from that angle, when Evan comes for them, and it's a very typical target. It's a young shithead racist militia group. It's who Evan goes after. But Tommy's going to try and really help them and to three-dimensionalize it. Those are Tommy's people too. He's like, these guys grew up without any dads or any role models. Like, we have to figure it out. And so, one of the things is, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier with the fact that a lot of people now have these friend groups that everybody, is in compliance on every major political issue. Having a friend, so many of my friends have very different belief systems and structures than me. It's where I learned them. Who the fuck wants a friend who you agree with about everything? And it's funny because some of my friends who are much more conservative, people are like, I can't believe you're friends with them. It's like, can you imagine being friends for, gosh, it's been 34 years with Jordan Peterson and agreeing with him on everything? Like, that'd be the most boring relationship ever.
I mean, you would end up dressed like the Riddler at some point.
It's true. It'd go horribly awry. Yeah. Well, I already have like bespoke clothes with decorations, and it's already going bad.
It's all on the inside though.
But you want people. You and I have areas where like we're constantly figuring out how to integrate the way that you think and see the world with things that I have. It's what makes problem solving really helpful with all these differences. And so in a lot of ways, a friend can also be a good mirror. A friend can hold up something to you and can expose, especially if you have trust, your willful blindness, right? Your sin, your shortcoming. And how people change their mind, it's very rarely, though I've written, a shitload of op-eds, and I like to think that some of them might have some impact or help people along the way, but nobody has a massive epiphany or movement through their life that's different because they read something or heard some idea. So often it's because somebody who we love, who we're close to, and who we're not willing to merely unfriend or ignore or cancel, does something or says something or votes in a way or voices an opinion that we cannot make sense of, that's really, really painful to us, but we are strong enough not to get rid of them and to also understand that to try to forge across this difference in beliefs, you know, we got to sacrifice a bunch of stuff on the way to come to that meeting point. And sometimes they do too. And that's very much what Evan's up against in Nemesis with Tommy. Either they're going to kill each other, or he's going to kill these young men who Tommy's in charge of, or he's going to come out with a completely different understanding of himself. And that's precisely what happens again in Antihero with Angra.
Yeah. And by the way, Tommy doesn't validate their grievance, these little militia kids. He slaps the shit out of them and calls them dumbass. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So it's like, it isn't, it's three-dimensional thinking, it's empathy, but it's not toxic. It's empathy that says, hey, I understand why you're here, but you got to get the fuck out.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's a big part of it.
And Evan goes, I don't name the state, but, you know, Evan goes to this small rural town, which is very familiar, as a force of vengeance with his code and his value set outside it. Tommy goes to learn the ground truth. He's asking who's in charge, how's the neighborhood run. One of these kids is the son of a guy who he didn't like at all, but he was one of his brothers in the military who died in his arms. And Tommy didn't even like the guy, but he swore when the guy was dying that he would, if the kid ever called and needed something, that he'd be there for him. And so Tommy's seeing to a vow, and he's trying to take care of these kids in a way that is transformational for them. And that does not mean giving into their grievances or making excuses for them. He's brutal on them, but he's protective of them against Evan when Evan comes in.
Yeah. Yeah, this is like complementary. Like everything in life is complementary. It's not, nothing is... things aren't diffuse, they're binary most of the time, I think. Like having those people in your lives that challenge you like that, it isn't just about your personal growth, because I might not ever be able to fully adopt that position. I might not have the capability to do it, but I can see its value, and then you being there to do that, it completes me. You know what I mean? As a human being. It's why people work so well in pairs, as we discussed earlier with the creative type and the guy who gets shit done, the organization, the creative and the CFO, the COO. You know what I mean? And it's also why I've never believed that old adage in relationships that you should be complete before you go look for a partner. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you should certainly be able to look yourself in the mirror. You should be comfortable with who you are as a person.
You should be able to stand on your own, and then you go in and you learn like crazy.
Yeah.
If you're in an authentic relationship, you're learning like crazy.
Yeah, I don't think. I've never subscribed. I don't think that's realistic at all. That you're complete, and then what would be the point of another person at that point? No, you complement each other in different ways, and you grow together. That's the only way it can possibly work. Everything else is everything else in your life, other than the complementary relationships, not just to other people, but to the circumstances of your life. You know what I mean? I mean, think about owning a dog, going from helpless puppy to more or less independent, best friend guy that you love, to helpless in old age again. And then you have to watch him die. It's fucking a process. And you personally change throughout that process, even if it's just in that one relationship you change.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to go through, to be honest.
I do too. It's so hard, man. Losing dogs is so hard. And you're going to do it. I mean, I got 4. I got 3 Rhodesian Ridgebacks and a scruffy mutt. And, when you get in that you're going to go through that cycle. I've put 2 Ridgebacks down by now. And we do it because, they're incredible. They're little like oxytocin positive feedback loops, but you're right. You have to go through that cycle with all of it. And you don't get, part of the joy and part of what we have of meaning and joy and love is because something is finite.
That's right. That's what gives meaning to life in general. If life was permanent, then it would have no meaning,
Yeah.
I think George Carlin used to say that purchasing a dog is like buying a small tragedy. You know what I mean? Like it's coming at some point. And we know it instinctively. We know it when we begin that relationship. And I wish that we would remind ourselves of it more often. Not in like a negative way either. Just like, all right, these are the good times.
Yeah, I do that a lot now. It's weird. I'm super close with my dogs. Like I mentioned, I've had 5 Ridgebacks now, and we got this mutt. But I think about that a lot with them. We stacked a whole bunch of them young. So for a while, we had 4 4 dogs below the age of 3, which was a joy. And when we finally got out of endless puppy training, like, knock all the wood, but like, they're healthy. They wrestle, Ridgebacks wrestle. If you don't know the breed, you think they're killing each other. They're such a delight all the time. And to have this pack young, I think of that every day when I come down and see them, and they're jumping over the couch and fighting and wrestling. And I just think this is this amazing period of time, and don't take a minute of it for granted.
Yeah. Well, this is a good place to wrap it up on dogs.
Always begin and end on dogs.
Yeah, I agree. Tell everybody where they can find you and all your work.
Okay. Well, you can find the Orphan X series any bookstore there is, Independence, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, the whole shebang. And you can find me online. I'm on X, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram primarily. You can find me there for different stuff. I got my website's gregghurwitz.net. You can sign up for the newsletters for updates on new books, events, touring, all that kind of stuff. And to get, one of the things Evan does is he drinks only the world's finest vodkas. So if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get a PDF that lists and has pictures of all the vodkas and the ways that I've described them throughout the series. So
okay, that's interesting. I've always wanted to try that one. I believe it's Icelandic.
Rakia?
Yeah. I've never had it. It's like $4,000 a bottle, right?
That one's not as much. I have one that you're going to have when you come visit me in LA, which is called Kaufman Vintage. It's Russian, and you can't get it now almost at all because of the war. It's like, but it's extraordinary. It's 16 times distilled through quartz. It's amazing.
Through quartz?
Yeah. It's so good. So that's the one we'll start you on. I have a couple of them. We'll do a little flight. We'll do it like a mini martini flight.
Okay. Yeah, I'm down with that.
Bring the hard AF.
I will, yeah.
That'll be our palate cleansers.
Well, I mean, Yamazaki too.
That Yamazaki something.
It's really good. Yeah. For $100 a bottle, you can't beat it. All right. Well, thanks for coming today. Appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me
on. And
man.
All of your mentorship as I'm learning how to write. I'm good at thinking. Writing is a different skill set for me. So I'm working at it.
Yeah, you're doing a great job with it, man. Thank you.
And we're going to go, this will be out next week, but keep an eye out for the live show we do at Drinking Bros. It'll be a little bit wilder than this probably.
Yeah, it will.
Although hopefully
we're throwing Ross in the mix. So.
Yeah, the last live event you and I did, there was some, let's call them older ladies there, which is interesting. Not odd because they love thrillers. I don't know why people don't know this about that generation of women. They fucking love thrillers. The newer one is more on true crime stuff, but the old one is like they grew up like reading cowboy Louis L'Amour shit. You know what I mean?
All the way through Robert B. Parker, Spencer for Hire, the whole thing.
But anyways, we'll try not to offend anybody. Get kicked out of Barnes & Noble permanently.
I'm sure that we're going to offend some people, but it'll be worth it.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Again, thanks for coming.
Yeah, always good to see you, man.
Everybody go check out Gregg Hurwitz. Check out Anti-Hero, the new book, and buy the whole series, actually. You should read every book. Otherwise, you're not going to know what the fuck's going on, But they are good standalones.
Yeah, I reset each one. But yeah, if you're series readers, just take a run through them.
Yep. It's my favorite thriller series ever because I really like Mitch Rapp. Before I read yours, that was my favorite one because the action is the best in my opinion.
Yeah.
I like the Gray Man too. Gray Man's good.
Greeny's good.
Yeah, he's a good writer. Action's good. Again, it's another one where the action is good. But for the real moral hero's journey, I don't think it gets any better than this.
Thank you.
Yeah. So everybody go check that out. And thank you for listening. This has been Citizen.